My name is Alice, and I am a 20-year-old who has often felt sidelined within my own family, especially in comparison to my younger brother, Sam, who is 14 and adopted. Sam was brought into our family about 9 years ago, and strangely, he appears to blend in more seamlessly than I do. My parents have even remarked humorously how much more he resembles them, suggesting he is more their ideal child. Though their jokes feel hurtful and serious to me, our family could easily grace the covers of lifestyle magazines, embodying conventional beauty, a standard I feel I don't meet. Diagnosed with type 2 diabetes as a child, managing my weight has always been a challenge. My eating was heavily controlled by my parents, pushing me to sometimes eat secretly, as their monitoring felt more like deprivation. About 5 months ago, my health took another hit with a diagnosis of fibromyalgia, which has intermittently confined me to a wheelchair due to severe symptoms. The adjustment has been hard, not just physically but also mentally. Already an introvert, I now spend most of my time in my room, trying not to impose on anyone, feeling deeply lonely but resigned to not being a burden. Despite my struggles, I have tried to maintain some normalcy, like participating in our annual family Christmas photo, a long-standing tradition. This year, however, as I dressed up and prepared to join in, my presence was unexpectedly rejected. My parents awkwardly suggested the photo be limited to just them and Sam, citing my wheelchair as a reason, saying it would spoil the picture. I offered to stand for a few shots, but they refused, making it clear they did not want me included at all. Devastated, I retreated to my room and wept, with no one coming to check on me. This heartbreak was what prompted me to call my grandmother and confide in her about everything. My grandmother, a pillar of strength who rebuilt her life after being widowed early, listened with empathy and took immediate action by altering her will in response. This shocked my parents and brought to light the deep issues within our family dynamics. This sequence of events not only exposed the superficiality and conditional acceptance in my family, but also underscored my grandmother's unwavering support for me in my most challenging times. For causing drama and making the situation uncomfortable, despite their harsh words, I had made peace with the fact that their acceptance was conditional and unlikely to change. My grandmother has always been a beacon of strength and inspiration for me. Her unconditional love is a stark contrast to the conditional acceptance I felt from my parents. Although I had hoped for a long time that my parents would change their ways and treat me better, that Christmas incident was a harsh reminder that it might never happen. Each time my grandmother suggested that I could live with her, I hesitated, clinging to the hope of familial acceptance. However, that day, I finally accepted her offer, realizing that my presence in my own home was merely tolerated, not wanted. The pain of feeling excluded by my own family was profound, but my grandmother was always there to support and comfort me. During our phone call, as I sobbed and shared my heartache, she assured me she would be there to take me away as soon as she returned from her cruise. She lives an adventurous life, always surrounded by friends and laughter, a stark contrast to the solitude of my own room where I confined myself. The days leading up to her arrival were filled with silence at home. I went about my daily routine, school, and seclusion. My parents and Sam carried on as if nothing was wrong, masking the tension that lay beneath the surface. When my grandmother arrived, I was the one who welcomed her into our home. My parents were unsuspecting of the change about to unfold. They greeted her casually, unaware that she knew of their exclusion of me from the family photo. When she confronted them, they were initially confused about how she could have known, but soon realized I must have told her. Instead of apologizing, they dismissed the incident, repeating their rationale that they didn't want to bother me with standing or having my wheelchair in the photo. I couldn't hold back any longer. I told them and my grandmother that their excuses were just a cover for their discomfort with including me. I pointed out the disparity in how they treated Sam and me, highlighting that despite Sam being adopted, he was embraced as their own, whereas I, their biological daughter, was treated as an outsider. Sam averted his gaze, perhaps in guilt or acknowledgement of the truth in my words. My parents' reaction was defensive. They accused me of being dramatic and spoiled, expecting an apology from me for simply voicing the inequality and neglect I felt. They could not see how their actions and words were not just personal slights, but deep wounds to my sense of belonging. As painful as it was to confront these truths, my grandmother's presence gave me the strength to stand up for myself. Her unwavering support made me realize that I deserved to be in an environment where I was valued and loved unconditionally. With her, I knew I would find the acceptance and love that was so lacking in my own home. I was ready to leave, not just the house, but the conditional love that had defined my existence there. My grandmother had promised to take me with her, and I trusted her completely, ready for a new beginning where I could truly feel like part of a family. But now that we've started to reconnect, things are gradually improving between us. The conversation with my grandmother had opened my eyes to many things, including how my brother had been influenced by our parents' behavior towards me. I guess he had picked up on their cues without fully understanding the impact of his actions on me. But his willingness to acknowledge his mistakes and reach out to mend our relationship meant a lot to me in that moment at home. When I was ready to defend myself further, my grandmother stepped in, making it clear she was there to put an end to the mistreatment I had endured for so long. My parents appeared bewildered when she announced she was taking me to live with her. They had always made me feel like a burden, and now they didn't even resist letting me go. It was a painful confirmation of what I had always felt, that they didn't truly want me as part of the family. The silence that followed her announcement was deafening. When my grandmother revealed her decision to take me away, my parents initially seemed indifferent, but their facade cracked when she declared that she was cutting them out of her will. Suddenly, their true colors showed. The mention of inheritance set them off as they scrambled to defend their position, revealing just how materialistic their motives were. My grandmother, having been a successful grocery store owner, had accumulated considerable wealth, which I had never really thought much about because I loved her for who she was, not what she had. Unlike my parents, my love for her was unconditional. She showed my parents the revised documents, making it clear that everything would now go to Sam and me. The drama escalated as they pleaded and bargained with her, but my grandmother remained unmoved by their tears. She instructed me to pack my belongings and prepare to leave with her immediately. I had been ready for this moment, knowing deep down that living with her would be a much healthier environment for me. As I gathered my things, my parents continued their futile pleas, but Sam was the only one who truly seemed to care about saying goodbye. Driving away from that house was a liberating yet bittersweet moment. I was leaving behind a lot of painful memories, but I was also moving towards a new chapter of my life, one filled with genuine love and support from my grandmother. Living with her has brought so much peace to my life. Being closer to school allows me more sleep and less stress in the mornings, and every day feels like a step toward healing. Sam's message soon after I left was a significant gesture. He apologized for his past behavior and expressed his gratitude for our family, acknowledging how much better his life was because of our parents' decision to adopt him and my consistent treatment of him as a true brother. He was eager to start anew and repair our bond, which we began to do by spending time together at school. These changes were not easy, but they were necessary. The truth had been painful, but it also set me free. Now, with my grandmother's support and a rekindling relationship with Sam, I was finally starting to feel like I belonged to a family that truly cared about me. Despite the complicated nature of our family dynamics, Sam has always been treated as a full member of the family, especially by our parents. Recently, during one of our casual hangouts, Sam mentioned something that's been weighing heavily on me. We were just chatting, and I couldn't help but ask about what was happening back at the house. He shared that tensions were high between our parents. Apparently, they've been caught up in a blame game ever since I moved out. My mom accused my dad of being the reason I felt pushed away for so long, particularly pointing to his suggestion to exclude me from the family Christmas photo. On the other hand, my dad argued that my mom had always overreacted to challenges, making it seem like having me as a child was the most difficult task she had ever faced. Sam casually mentioned that he was worried they might end up getting divorced, given the current state of their relationship. This comment, though made in passing, stuck with me and has left me feeling uneasy ever since. It's irrational, but part of me can't shake the feeling that if they do get divorced, somehow it would be my fault. Maybe I overreacted by feeling hurt over the photo incident, and perhaps they never intended to make me feel like a burden. These thoughts have been difficult to dismiss, and I find myself in a loop of self-blame and regret, even though I know deep down that their marital issues are not my responsibility. It's hard not to feel like a doormat for even thinking this way, but it's what's been on my mind, and I can't seem to push it away. That's why I'm turning to this community for some objective reassurance. To provide some context for those who might be curious, my grandmother recently revised her will to leave everything to Sam and me, primarily because of how our parents mishandled things with me. Sam hadn't been part of the negative behaviors, and at his young age, my grandmother and I both feel he deserves a chance to rectify any past mistakes. It wouldn't be fair to push him away because of our parents' actions. If we did, we'd be no different from them. People have also asked about Sam's background. His biological mother was just 17 when she had him and had to leave college due to her pregnancy and struggles with substance abuse. His father was mostly absent, only appearing sporadically in his life. Sam's maternal grandparents tried several times to help their daughter straighten out her life and be a good mother, but eventually they encouraged her to consider adoption when Sam was 7, as they saw it as a chance to provide him with a better future. My parents were already considering adoption due to the complications of my mother's first pregnancy and didn't want to risk going through that again. They knew Sam's biological mother's cousin from college, which is how they learned about Sam's situation. They fostered him for a while before adopting him officially. Sam has stayed in touch with his grandparents, meeting them monthly. But he has not had contact with his parents since the adoption. His mother finds it too painful to see him, and his father has completely disappeared from his life. Navigating these complex family relationships has been challenging, but opening up about these issues here helps me process my feelings and, hopefully, gain some clarity and support from others who might have similar experiences. Their sudden apology, although needed, felt insincere and more about them wanting to mend their image before I left for college. It seemed like an attempt to smooth things over superficially without addressing the real issues that caused the rift in the first place. In the past, I've made some comments in frustration about Sam being adopted during a heated argument, which I regret. I've apologized to him because he means the world to me, and I never intended to make him feel like he was any less a part of our family. I've always seen Sam as my brother, not just because we were raised together, but because I genuinely care for him. Despite the rocky phases we've experienced, I'm committed to maintaining a strong relationship with him. We've been through a lot due to our parents' behavior, and I refuse to let that drive a wedge between us anymore. I even offered Sam the option to come and live with me and our grandmother if things at home become unbearable. The idea isn't to pull him away from our parents, but to provide him with a safe and peaceful alternative if he needs it. In my recent updates, I've been overwhelmed by the support from this community. It's been reassuring to hear from others who've been in similar situations, and it's helped me feel less isolated. After discussing with my grandmother my fears of being responsible for my parents' marital issues, she firmly reminded me that I wasn't to blame. She pointed out that my parents had been directing their frustrations at each other because they no longer had me to focus on. This shift in their dynamics wasn't caused by me standing up for myself, but by their inability to handle their own problems constructively. If they end up divorcing, it would indeed be sad, but it is not my burden to bear. Sam and I have discussed this too, and he reassured me that he didn't intend to make me feel guilty about their problems. He was just answering my question. Recently, my parents visited unexpectedly to discuss our strained relationship. They took time off work to talk, but it wasn't a great day for me, and I wasn't in the right headspace to engage. They expressed a desire to spend time with me before I head off to college and attempted an apology, which they framed in a way that suggested they were sorry I felt offended, rather than acknowledging that their actions were inherently hurtful. This phrasing didn't sit well with me. It felt like they were dodging the core issue. My reaction was to suggest they put their thoughts in an email or return another time. When I was more prepared to talk, I needed space to process, and rushing a conversation wasn't going to resolve anything substantial. This might seem like I was avoiding the issue, but it was necessary for me to manage the situation on my terms, especially considering the emotional toll their previous behavior had on me. Sam understands my stance and supports my decision to handle things this way. We've promised each other not to let family disputes influence our bond. Whatever the outcome with our parents, our commitment is to remain supportive of each other, ensuring that the challenges we face don't erode the trust and love we've rebuilt. This approach is about maintaining our well-being and ensuring that regardless of what happens in our family, our relationship remains intact and strong. After a series of challenging interactions, it's become clear that my parents' approach to our issues isn't just about understanding me or correcting past mistakes. During a recent attempt at conversation, I tried explaining that my upset feelings were due to their offensive actions. However, rather than acknowledging this and working to make amends, they shifted the focus, claiming my distance was to blame for their ignorance of my struggles. This just confirmed my suspicion that they were incapable of genuine apologies and were more interested in manipulating the situation to make me feel responsible. Feeling increasingly frustrated and realizing that this cycle of blame and guilt was going nowhere, I asked them to leave. They resisted, insisting we needed to have a full discussion, as if a mere conversation could mend the deep-rooted issues between us. They seemed to think that because of what they had provided for me, which were essentially basic parental responsibilities, they deserved this dialogue. I couldn't engage further without becoming more upset, so I decided to retreat to my room. At that point, my dad escalated the situation by demanding I stay and talk. Thankfully, my grandmother was there to intervene. She firmly told my dad that raising his voice wasn't acceptable in her home, especially after the way they had treated me. She made it clear that if I chose not to engage, they had to respect that decision and leave. This incident was an eye-opener for both me and them. It underscored that their main concern was how this familial discord might look to others, rather than the actual well-being of their children. They were worried about appearances, fearing what people might think if they knew I had moved in with my grandmother. I was beyond caring about their concerns for reputation. I was focused on my own future and healing. After they left, my grandmother and I discussed whether I wanted to see them again soon. For now, my answer was a resounding no. She supported my decision, assuring me that she wouldn't allow them to just drop by uninvited next time. I'd also talked to Sam about their visit. He was surprised by their actions and expressed that the mood at home was gloomy since their return. While I felt for him, I knew I needed to maintain this distance for my own mental health. I'll be leaving for college in a week. I got into my first choice school, and my grandmother has arranged everything for my move. She'll even stay with me for the first couple of weeks to help me settle into my new apartment. It's a big step, living on my own, but I'm ready and looking forward to what the future holds. My mental health has significantly improved without the constant stress from my parents. Sam and I plan to keep in close contact through FaceTime, aiming to chat at least once a week. Although I'm sad to leave my current life and the security of my grandmother's home, I'm genuinely excited about starting this new chapter.
Welcome back, and thank you for tuning into Cheating Tales Lab. We appreciate every single one of you. We'd love to know, what part of the world are you watching from right now? Let us know in the comments. Now, let's dive into today's story. The autumn rain pelted against the master bedroom's window, creating a rhythmic backdrop to Detective Thomas Reeves' mounting unease. He stood in the doorway of their walk-in closet, his weathered hands tucked into the pockets of his department-issued slacks, watching his wife prepare for another evening out. Tori's face, as she applied her signature red lipstick with practiced precision. 20 years with Boston PD and a decade in Special Forces had taught Thomas to trust his instincts. Those same instincts now churned his stomach as he observed the subtle changes in his wife's behavior over the past few months. Victoria Tori Reeves had always been ambitious. It was what had drawn him to her in the first place. But lately, there was something different in the way she carried herself, something that set off warning bells in his mind. "Another late meeting, honey?" Thomas asked, his tone carefully neutral. He watched her reflection in the ornate vanity mirror, noting how she didn't quite meet his eyes. Her hands moved with deliberate grace as she adjusted her pearl earrings, his anniversary gift from 3 years ago. "The Morrison development won't close itself," Tori replied, her voice carrying that new edge of dismissiveness that had become all too familiar. She reached for her Chanel No. 5, the scent she'd worn since they first met at that charity gala 15 years ago. "Don't wait up." Thomas's eyes narrowed slightly as she stood, smoothing down her black Valentino dress, one he didn't recognize. The price tag was probably equivalent to a month of his detective's salary. Her wardrobe had undergone a dramatic transformation recently. Designer labels had replaced the already expensive clothes she used to wear. The jewelry had become more ostentatious, the shoes more exotic, the handbags bearing increasingly prestigious names. The board meetings seemed to be running later and later these days, he observed, stepping aside as she brushed past him. That's when he caught it, beneath her signature perfume. A distinctly masculine scent lingered. His jaw clenched imperceptibly, but years of undercover work helped him maintain his composed exterior. "Well, that's what happens when you're handling a $50 million development, Thomas," she said, her heels clicking against the hardwood floors as she made her way down the hallway. The sound echoed through their recently renovated Victorian home in Beacon Hill, another symbol of Tori's rising success in Boston's cutthroat real estate market. Following her downstairs, Thomas noticed how she checked her phone repeatedly, her manicured fingers dancing across the screen with quick, nervous energy. The blue light illuminated her face, highlighting the subtle changes in her makeup routine. Darker eyeshadow, heavier contouring, as if she were preparing for more than just a business meeting. "Will Jack Morrison be there tonight?" Thomas asked casually, referring to the development's primary investor. He leaned against the kitchen island, watching as she gathered her things. Tori paused for a fraction of a second, so brief anyone else might have missed it. "No, he's in Dubai this week. It's mostly the technical team and some of the board members." She wouldn't meet his eyes as she tucked her phone into her new Hermes Birkin bag. "Right?" Thomas nodded, years of interrogation experience telling him there was more to the story. "The charity board members?" "Among others," she replied vaguely, checking her reflection in the hallway mirror one last time. The diamonds at her throat, definitely new, caught the light as she adjusted her collar. Thomas moved to open the front door for her, playing the role of devoted husband. "Drive safely. The rain's getting worse." For a moment, Tori's facade cracked, and something like guilt flickered across her features. She reached up and straightened his tie, an intimate gesture from their earlier years together. "Don't work too hard on that cold case of yours. You need your rest too." The fact that she remembered he was working on a cold case surprised him. Their conversations had become increasingly superficial lately, centered around schedules and social obligations rather than the substance of their daily lives. As she walked to her Mercedes GLS, another recent upgrade, Thomas noticed how she checked her surroundings before getting in, a behavior he'd seen countless times in surveillance subjects who thought they were being watched. Standing in the doorway, he watched until her taillights disappeared into the rainy darkness. The scent of her perfume lingered in the air, but that other scent, woodsy, expensive, masculine, seemed to mock him. Thomas closed the door and walked to his home office, his footsteps heavy with purpose. Settling into his leather chair, he opened his laptop and pulled up the GPS tracking data from Tori's car, a precaution he'd taken 2 weeks ago when his suspicions first crystallized. The blue dot moved through the city, but instead of heading toward the financial district where her office was located, it turned toward the Back Bay area. Thomas pulled out his phone and dialed a familiar number. After 3 rings, a warm, slightly husky female voice answered.
Rodriguez.
Grace, it's Tom. Got time for coffee tomorrow morning? Our usual spot? There was a pause on the line, and he could practically hear his former partner's mind working. Detective Grace Rodriguez hadn't become the head of financial crimes by missing subtle cues. Tom? Everything okay? Just need your expertise on something, he replied, his eyes still fixed on the moving on his screen. And your discretion. Dorchester Diner, 7 a.m.? Grace suggested, concern evident in her voice. I'll grab our usual booth. Thanks, Grace. I'll bring the case files. He ended the call and leaned back in his chair, his mind already processing the patterns he'd observed over the past months. The late meetings, the sudden influx of expensive goods, the changing behaviors, and now this mysterious masculine scent. Thomas reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a small notebook where he'd been documenting his observations. The detective in him knew he needed evidence, not just suspicions. The husband in him hoped he was wrong. But 20 years of police work and a decade in special forces had taught him one invaluable lesson: trust your gut. Opening a new page, he began writing, his pen moving quickly across the paper as he detailed the events of the evening. Outside, the rain continued to fall, and somewhere in the city, his wife was heading to a meeting that he was increasingly certain had nothing to do with charity or real estate development. The grandfather clock in the hallway struck 9, its deep chimes echoing through the empty house. Thomas closed his notebook and walked to the window, watching the rain create patterns on the glass. In his mind, he was already planning his next moves, drawing on years of experience in surveillance and investigation. If Tori was involved in something beyond their marriage, he would find out. And if his instincts were right, as they usually were, this was about more than just a possible affair. He pulled out his phone again and scrolled through his contacts until he found another familiar name. After everything he'd seen in his career, Thomas knew that sometimes the biggest dangers came not from obvious threats, but from the subtle erosion of trust in the places you least expected it. Tomorrow's coffee with Grace would be just the beginning. The real investigation was about to start. The Dorchester Diner hadn't changed in the 15 years Thomas had been coming here. The same cracked vinyl booths, the same coffee-stained menus, and the same morning rush of cops and construction workers looking for a decent breakfast before their shifts. The familiar smell of coffee and bacon grease provided an odd comfort as Thomas slid into his usual booth, opposite Grace Rodriguez. Grace looked exactly as he remembered from their days working homicide together. Sharp dark eyes that missed nothing, hair pulled back in a no-nonsense bun, and an expression that balanced professional concern with personal warmth. She had already ordered their usual, black coffee for him, café con leche for her, and a plate of hash browns to share. You look like hell, Tom, she said without preamble, sliding his coffee across the table, the morning light filtering through the rain-streaked windows under his eyes, highlighting the sleepless night he'd spent poring over financial records and GPS data. Thomas wrapped his hands around the warm mug, feeling the weight of what he was about to do. Thanks for meeting me, Grace. This isn't exactly official business. I figured as much when you called last night, she replied, stirring her coffee thoughtfully. You've got that look you used to get during undercover ops, like you're carrying something heavy. He pulled out a manila folder from his briefcase and placed it on the table between them, but didn't open it immediately. You sure you want to pull this thread, Tom? Grace asked, her dark eyes concerned. Sometimes ignorance really is bliss. The waitress approached their table, Betty, who'd been serving them for years. She didn't even need to ask for their order. 2 Denver omelets, extra cheese for the detective, extra peppers for the lady? Thomas nodded, managing a small smile. Thanks, Betty. And maybe keep the coffee coming? After Betty left, Thomas leaned forward, his voice low. I need to know, Grace. Something bigger is happening here. I can feel it. He opened the folder, revealing carefully organized documents, bank statements, property records, and surveillance photos. Grace's eyes widened slightly as she recognized Tori in some of the images, entering various high-end hotels and restaurants. I've been tracking some unusual patterns, Thomas continued, spreading out the documents. Tori's real estate business has always been successful, but lately, the numbers don't add up. Properties are changing hands at prices that don't make sense for the market. There are shell companies appearing and disappearing within weeks. Grace picked up one of the bank statements, her trained eyes scanning the transactions. These amounts, they're structured to avoid reporting requirements. Multiple transactions just under 10,000, spaced out to look random. She looked up at him sharply. Tom, this has all the hallmarks of money laundering. Keep going, Thomas urged, pushing forward another document. Check out who joined her charity board 3 months ago. Grace's eyes narrowed as she read the name. Alexander Wade? The hedge fund manager? She pulled out her phone and quickly typed something. Wait a minute. My department's been hearing whispers about him. Nothing concrete enough for an investigation, but enough to raise red flags, Thomas finished. He pulled out a series of surveillance photos he'd had taken over the past week. They showed Tori and Wade meeting at various locations. The Four Seasons, the Bristol Lounge, even a discreet wine bar in the South End. Betty returned with their omelets, and they fell silent until she left. Grace studied the photos while absently cutting into her breakfast. Their body language is interesting, she observed. It's intimate, but something feels off. Like they're performing for an audience. Thomas nodded, pushing his own breakfast around his plate. That's what I thought too. Watch this video. He handed her his phone, showing footage of Tori and Wade entering the Mandarin Oriental. See how they keep checking their surroundings. That's not the behavior of people having an affair. That's tradecraft. Grace let out a low whistle. Your wife's gotten herself mixed up in something serious, Tom. These aren't amateur moves. She paused, choosing her next words carefully. Have you considered that she might be under pressure? Coercion? I've considered everything, Thomas replied, his voice tight. But I need proof. That's why I came to you. You've got resources in financial crimes that I can't access without raising flags. Grace was quiet for a moment, sipping her coffee. Finally, she set down her cup with determination. Okay, I'll help, but we need to be smart about this. If Wade is who I think he is, we're dealing with professionals. One wrong move could spook them. Or worse. I know the risks, Thomas said, thinking of the masculine scent he detected on Tori's clothes. But I can't just sit back and watch. Not when my instincts are screaming that something's wrong. Grace pulled out her own notebook and began writing. I'll start with Wade's financials. My team's been building a database of suspicious real estate transactions in the area. I'll cross-reference it with your wife's developments. She looked up at him seriously. But Tom, you need to maintain normalcy. If they suspect you're investigating, I know how to play this, Grace, he assured her, though his heart felt heavy. 20 years of undercover work teaches you a few things about keeping up appearances. They spent the next hour going through the documents, Grace making notes and occasionally sending texts to her team. The diner slowly emptied as the morning rush ended, leaving them relatively alone with their cooling coffee and growing concerns. There's one more thing, Thomas said finally, pulling out a last photograph. This was taken yesterday at the St. Regis. The man with Wade. Recognize him? Grace studied the image carefully, her expression darkening. I know this guy. He's connected to some serious players in the international finance world. Tom, if these people are involved... She didn't need to finish the sentence. They both knew what happened when high finance mixed with criminal enterprises. Keep digging, Thomas said, gathering the documents back into his folder. But Grace, be careful. Use secure channels only, and watch your back. As they stood to leave, Grace caught his arm. Tom, whatever this is, we'll figure it out. Just don't do anything rash, okay? Thomas managed a grim smile. You know me, Grace. Slow and steady wins the race. Yeah, that's what worries me, she muttered. but squeezed his arm supportively before heading out into the rainy morning. Thomas watched her go, then paid their bill, leaving Betty an extra-large tip. As he stepped out into the dreary Boston weather, his phone buzzed with a text from Tori. "Working late again tonight. Don't wait up." He tucked the phone away, his jaw set. The investigation was officially underway, and there was no turning back now. Whatever truth lay at the end of this path, Thomas Reeves was determined to uncover it, no matter the cost. The fluorescent lights of the police precinct parking garage. Thomas made his way to his car, his mind still processing the day's developments. Grace had sent him some preliminary findings about Wade's financial activities, and the picture they painted was increasingly disturbing. The rain that had been falling all day had finally stopped, leaving the concrete floor slick and reflecting the artificial light like a mirror. It was nearly midnight, and the garage was almost empty. Most of the day's shift had gone home hours ago. Thomas's footsteps echoed in the cavernous space as he walked toward his SUV, his briefcase heavy with files he'd been reviewing. The sound of another set of footsteps made him pause, his hand instinctively moving toward his shoulder holster. "Detective Reeves?" The voice was female, nervous, and coming from behind a concrete pillar. Thomas turned slowly, his body tensed for action. A young woman stepped into the light, mid-20s, professionally dressed but disheveled, as if she'd been waiting for hours. Her hands were visibly trembling. "I'm Bethany Porter," she said, glancing anxiously over her shoulder. "Mr. Wade's assistant. Please, I need to talk to you." Thomas studied her carefully, noting the dark circles under her eyes and the way she kept shifting her weight from foot to foot. "Kind of late for a social call, Miss Porter." "This isn't social," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. She reached into her purse, causing Thomas to tense again, but she only withdrew a USB drive. "Mr. Wade isn't who he claims to be. Neither is your wife. They're planning something terrible. I couldn't live with myself if I didn't warn you." Thomas didn't reach for the drive immediately. "Why come to me? Why not go to the FBI or the SEC?" Bethany's laugh was hollow, tinged with hysteria. "You think I haven't tried? Wade has connections everywhere. Files disappear, complaints get buried. Witnesses?" She swallowed hard. "Witnesses have accidents." A car's engine started somewhere in the garage, making Bethany jump. "Please," she thrust the USB drive toward him. "Everything's on here, but be careful how you access it. They monitor everything." Thomas took the drive, noting how Bethany immediately withdrew her hand as if the brief contact had burned her. "How did you get this information?" "I'm his assistant. I see everything, schedule everything, handle all his correspondence. He thinks I'm just another pretty face, too scared or too stupid to understand what I'm seeing. But I've been documenting everything." Bethany's hands were shaking so badly now that she had to clasp them together. "The charity board meetings your wife attends? They're not what you think. The Morrison development isn't just about real estate. There are offshore accounts, shell companies, people who show up for one meeting and disappear forever." Another sound echoed through the garage, and Bethany nearly jumped out of her skin. Thomas reached out to steady her, but she flinched away from his touch. "Miss Porter," Thomas said quietly, using the same calm tone he'd employed countless times with frightened witnesses, "why don't you come up to the station? We can take your statement, get you some protection." "No." The word echoed off the concrete walls. No police reports, no official statements. Nothing that could be traced. She took a deep breath, trying to compose herself. Just look at what's on the drive. But not at home. Not at the station. They have ways of monitoring." Thomas slipped the drive into his pocket, his mind already racing through the implications. "How can I contact you if I need more information?" "You can't," Bethany said, already backing away into the shadows. "I've already stayed too long. They'll notice I'm gone." She turned to leave, then paused. "Detective Reeves? Be careful who you trust. Even the people closest to you. Especially the people closest to you." Before Thomas could respond, Bethany disappeared into the darkness of the garage, her footsteps fading quickly. He stood for a moment, the USB drive feeling like it weighed 1,000 pounds in his pocket. The garage had grown eerily quiet, with only the distant sound of traffic and the hum of fluorescent lights breaking the silence. Making a quick decision, Thomas walked briskly to his car, scanning his surroundings with heightened awareness. He started the engine but didn't leave immediately, instead pulling out his phone and sending a text to Grace. Need secure location. Tech support. Off the books. Her response came quickly. My place? 1 hour. Bring coffee. Thomas drove out of the garage, taking a circuitous route home first. He needed to maintain his normal routine in case anyone was watching. The USB drive seemed to burn in his pocket as he navigated the late-night Boston traffic, his mind replaying Bethany's warning about trusting those closest to him. At home, he found Tori's note on the kitchen counter. Gone to bed early. Big presentation tomorrow. The house was quiet, but Thomas moved silently anyway, years of training kicking in. He changed clothes, grabbed his laptop bag, and left a note of his own about following up on a case lead. In their bedroom, Tori was sleeping, or doing a convincing job of pretending to. The faint scent of that masculine cologne still lingered in the air, mixed with her perfume. Thomas stood in the doorway for a moment, watching the rise and fall of her breathing, remembering Bethany's words about trust and betrayal. Back in his car, Thomas pulled out an old burner phone he'd kept from his undercover days. It took him nearly an hour to reach Grace's place, making sure he wasn't being followed. The USB drive felt like a live grenade in his pocket, one that could blow his entire life apart once activated. Grace was waiting for him in her home office, an encrypted laptop already set up. Her face was grim as she took the drive from him. You sure you want to see what's on this? She asked, giving him one last chance to walk away. Whatever it is, there's no going back once we know. Thomas thought about Tori sleeping in their bed, about Bethany's trembling hands, about all the little changes he'd noticed over the past months that had led him to this moment. Do it, he said quietly. Grace nodded and plugged in the drive. As the files began decrypting on her secure system, Thomas pulled up a chair. Whatever secrets this drive held, whatever truth lay behind Bethany's warning, he knew his life would never be the same after tonight. The first file opened on Grace's screen, and Thomas felt his blood run cold. There, in meticulous detail, were plans he never could have imagined. Plans that made all his previous suspicions seem naive by comparison. The downtown office building that housed McKenna Security Solutions reflected the morning sun like a blade, its glass and steel exterior a testament to modern efficiency. Thomas sat in his car across the street, watching people enter and exit through the revolving doors. The USB drive from Bethany felt heavy in his pocket, its contents still sending chills down his spine whenever he thought about them. Colonel James Iron Jim McKenna's office occupied the entire 32nd floor, offering a panoramic view of Boston Harbor. The space spoke of military precision, awards and commendations arranged with geometric accuracy, furniture positioned for optimal tactical advantage, and not a single object out of place. McKenna himself hadn't changed much since their Special Forces days. Still built like a tank, with close-cropped gray hair and eyes that could drill through steel, he rose from behind his desk as Thomas entered. His handshake was firm, but his expression betrayed concern. You look like hell, Tom, McKenna said, gesturing to a chair. When's the last time you slept? Sleep's overrated, Thomas replied, dropping into the leather seat. He pulled out the USB drive and placed it on McKenna's desk. I need your expertise on this, Jim. And your discretion. McKenna's eyebrows rose slightly as he plugged the drive into a standalone laptop, one specifically designed for sensitive material. As he scrolled through the files, his expression darkened progressively. Your wife's gotten herself mixed up with some dangerous people, Tom, McKenna said, his voice grave as he reviewed the documents. He turned the laptop around, showing a dossier with a familiar face. Wade's real name is Anton Petrov. He's ex-FSB, suspected of running a massive money laundering operation. Thomas felt his stomach twist. FSB? Russian intelligence? Former FSB, McKenna corrected, pulling up more files. Went private after the Soviet collapse. Built himself quite an empire in the chaos that followed. He tapped a few keys, bringing up a complex web of financial transactions. These shell companies, the property deals your wife's been involved in, they're all fronts. The Morrison development isn't a real estate project. It's a sophisticated money laundering operation. But why target me? Thomas leaned forward, studying the intricate network of connections on the screen. McKenna's fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up more documents. Because you're investigating the Morrison development? Look at these dates. He pointed to a series of transactions. The operation was running smoothly until you started asking questions about some of the property transfers. That's when Petrov decided you needed to be eliminated. Thomas sat back, his mind racing. And Tori? How deep is she in this? That's where it gets interesting. McKenna pulled up another set of files. Your wife's real estate empire? Built on blood money. She just doesn't know it yet. Look at these early transactions from her first major development. The documents showed a complex web of overseas investors and shell companies, all leading back to organizations known to be fronts for criminal enterprises. Petrov's been grooming her for years, McKenna explained, starting with seemingly legitimate investments, gradually pulling her deeper into his operation. Now he's got enough evidence to implicate her in multiple felonies. He's forcing her cooperation. Thomas realized, the pieces falling into place. The murder plot is his way of tying up loose ends. McKenna nodded grimly. Classic FSB tactics. Compromise, control, and eliminate when necessary. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Thomas stood and walked to the window, looking out over the harbor. Ships moved slowly through the morning mist, their paths as carefully choreographed as the conspiracy he was uncovering. I need to get Tori out, he said finally. Whatever she's done, whatever mistakes she's made, she's still my wife. It's not that simple, Tom. McKenna joined him at the window. Petrov's organization is like a cancer. It's spread throughout the entire real estate market. Walking away isn't an option. They'll just find another way to eliminate you both. Thomas turned to face his old commander. Then we take them down. All of them. McKenna smiled, the same wolfish grin Thomas remembered from their combat days. Now that's the Tom Reeves I know. He walked back to his desk and pressed a button on his phone. Sarah, cancel my meetings for the day. And get me everything we have on the Morrison Development security protocols. For the next several hours, they pored over blueprints, security schedules, and financial records. McKenna's resources were impressive: satellite imagery, building schematics, personnel files for every security guard and maintenance worker in Petrov's organization. He's got a weakness, McKenna said, spreading out a map of Boston's financial district. Petrov's paranoid, but he's also arrogant. He thinks his FSB training makes him untouchable. That's why he's still operating in plain sight, hiding behind the Wade persona. We can use that, Thomas mused, studying the map. Make him think his plan is working. Let him get comfortable. McKenna nodded approvingly. Classical counterintelligence. Feed him what he expects to see while we build our case. He pulled up another file. I've got contacts in federal law enforcement who've been trying to nail Petrov for years. They just haven't had enough evidence to move on him. Until now, Thomas said, patting the USB drive. Until now, McKenna agreed. But we need to move carefully. One wrong step, and both you and your wife could disappear into a very deep hole. Thomas checked his phone. Another message from Tori about working late. The masculine cologne, the designer clothes, the late meetings, it all made sense now. She wasn't having an affair. She was being systematically trapped by a professional predator. What's our first move? Thomas asked, his jaw set with determination. McKenna pulled up a detailed organizational chart of Petrov's operation. We start by making him think he's winning. Let him believe his plan is proceeding exactly as he wants. Meanwhile, we gather evidence, build our case, and prepare for the moment when we can bring the whole thing crashing down. As they began planning their counter-operation, Thomas couldn't help but think of Tori, wondering if she was sitting in some luxury hotel right now, thinking she was playing Petrov's game, not realizing she was actually being played herself. One more thing, McKenna said, his voice deadly serious. From this moment on, trust no one outside this room. Petrov's got people everywhere, police, city hall, probably even federal agencies. We keep this completely compartmentalized. Thomas nodded, remembering Bethany's trembling hands as she handed him the USB drive. The young assistant had risked everything to warn him. He wouldn't let her sacrifice be in vain. McKenna stood, walking to a wall safe hidden behind a painting. He removed several burner phones and a set of encrypted flash drives. "Welcome to the Shadow War, old friend. Let's go hunting." The next 2 weeks became an elaborate dance of deception. Working with McKenna and Grace, Thomas orchestrated a careful counter-operation, feeding carefully crafted disinformation through various channels. They used Bethany's access to Wade's office to plant subtle hints that the murder plot was proceeding according to plan. Grace had set up a secure operations center in a defunct warehouse on the outskirts of Boston. The space hummed with surveillance equipment and computer monitors, each screen tracking different aspects of Petrov's operation. "Our friend made another withdrawal," Grace said, pointing to a financial transaction display. $5 million moved through the Cayman Islands this morning. Thomas studied the data scrolling across the screen. "He's getting ready to move. Consolidating his assets." The door opened, and a tall, elegant woman in her 50s entered the room. Madeline Walsh carried herself with the subtle confidence that came from decades of CIA operations. Her silver hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her eyes missed nothing as she surveyed the room. "Your instincts were right," she said without preamble, dropping a thick file on the conference table. "Petrov's organization is like a hydra. Cut off one head, 2 more appear. We need to take down the entire network." Thomas picked up the file, scanning its contents. "How deep does it go?" 12 cities, Madeline replied, pulling up a map on the main screen. Red dots appeared across the country, each one with its own compromised real estate developer as a front. "Your wife isn't the first person Petrov's manipulated this way, and she won't be the last unless we stop him." Grace leaned forward, studying the pattern. "It's always the same MO. Find ambitious developers, compromise them, then use their legitimate businesses to launder money?" "With variations," Madeline nodded. "Sometimes it's blackmail, sometimes seduction, sometimes financial manipulation. But the end result is always the same. Respected business people turned into unwitting pawns in his money laundering operation." Thomas felt a familiar ache in his chest as he thought about Tori. "So she's just another victim?" Madeline's expression softened slightly. "Your wife's situation is complicated. Her ambition made her vulnerable to manipulation, yes. But from what we've uncovered, she's not entirely innocent either. She made choices, Tom. Choices that went beyond normal business practices." Before Thomas could respond, one of Grace's analysts burst into the room. "We've got movement. Wade just scheduled an emergency board meeting for the Morrison development." They gathered around the main screen as security camera footage showed people arriving at the development's downtown office. Tori was among them, wearing a new Chanel suit and carrying her ever-present Hermes bag. "Look at her body language," Madeline observed. "She's nervous. See how she keeps adjusting her collar. Classic stress tell." Thomas watched his wife disappear into the building, remembering how she used to fidget with her jewelry when she was worried about something. Some things hadn't changed. "We've got audio," Grace announced, typing commands into her computer. The room filled with the sounds of the board meeting, transmitted through a device they'd managed to plant in the conference room. Wade/Petrov's smooth voice came through clearly. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased to announce that all obstacles to our project have been addressed. We can proceed with the final phase." The hidden meaning behind his words made Thomas's skin crawl. They were talking about his planned murder as if it were just another business transaction. "Your wife's staying very quiet," Madeline noted, listening intently. "Usually she's more vocal in these meetings." "She knows what's coming," Thomas said softly. "She's already made her choice." The meeting continued for another hour, with various board members discussing seemingly legitimate business matters. But to the trained observers in the warehouse, every word had a double meaning, every proposal a hidden agenda. After the meeting, they watched Tori and Wade leave together, heading to their usual hotel. But this time, something was different. "Look at Wade's security detail," McKenna pointed out, having joined them during the meeting. 2 new guys. "I know those faces, ex-Spetsnaz. He's bringing in his heavy hitters." "They're getting ready to move," Madeline agreed. "The question is, what's our play?" Thomas straightened up, his decision made. "We keep feeding them what they want to see. Make them think their plan is working perfectly. Meanwhile, we gather every piece of evidence we can find. Grace pulled up another screen showing financial transactions. I've been building RICO predicates. If we can prove the pattern across all 12 cities, we can take down the entire network, Madeline finished. But we need something concrete to tie it all together. Something that proves Wade is Petrov and shows the full scope of the operation. Thomas thought for a moment, then turned to McKenna. Those new security guys, can we get to them? McKenna's wolfish grin returned. Already working on it. One of them has a gambling problem. The other has a brother in Brighton Beach who owes money to the wrong people. Careful, Madeline warned. Push too hard, and Petrov will smell a trap. Then we don't push, Thomas said. We let them come to us. Make them think they're turning us. The room fell silent as they considered the risks. Playing a double game with professionals like Petrov's men was incredibly dangerous. One wrong move, and people would die. There's something else you should know, Madeline said quietly. We've been analyzing Tori's involvement more deeply. She's not just a conspirator or a victim. The pattern suggests she's been actively participating in these schemes for longer than we initially thought. Thomas felt the weight of those words settle on his shoulders. He'd been holding on to hope that his wife was merely a pawn in Petrov's game. But the evidence was becoming harder to ignore. Show me, he said finally. As Madeline pulled up the files, Thomas steeled himself for what he was about to learn about the woman he'd loved for 15 years. Sometimes, he reflected, the hardest truths were the ones closest to home. The parking garage echoed with the sound of footsteps and muffled voices. Thomas moved silently through the shadows, every sense alert for signs of danger. McKenna's intelligence had been clear. This was where Petrov's men would make their move. 3 figures emerged from a black SUV, their movements betraying their military training. Thomas recognized them from the surveillance photos. Petrov's ex-Spetsnaz operators. They carried themselves with the confident swagger of men who were used to being the most dangerous people in any room. What they didn't know was that Thomas had spent a decade in special forces specifically training to counter exactly their type of operation. He watched them sweep the garage, noting their practiced coordination. They were good, but they'd underestimated their target. The first sign that something was wrong came when the garage lights flickered. The 3 men immediately moved into defensive positions, but Thomas had already changed location. Years of combat experience had taught him the value of psychological warfare. Something's not right, one of them muttered in accented English. Split up. Find him. Thomas allowed himself a grim smile. They were playing right into his hands. He'd chosen this garage carefully. He knew every corner, every blind spot, every acoustic quirk. More importantly, he knew exactly how sound carried through the concrete structure. The first operator went down silently, caught in a chokehold that used his own momentum against him. Thomas zip-tied his hands and feet, then moved to his next position. The second man was more cautious, but even his training couldn't prepare him for the years of experience Thomas brought to the fight. The third operator proved the most challenging. He'd realized something was wrong when his companions failed to check in. His weapon was out, and his eyes scanned the shadows professionally. But he'd made one crucial mistake. He was looking for a cop, not a special forces operator. The fight was brief but intense. Thomas took a glancing blow to the ribs, but his counterattack was decisive. As the last operator lay unconscious, Thomas quickly secured him and began searching their phones. What he found made his blood run cold. Text messages, emails, and encrypted communications revealed the full scope of Petrov's operation. But more shocking was his wife's involvement. The messages made it clear. Tori wasn't just a pawn. She was actively participating in the scheme. One message chain particularly stood out. Target's routine confirmed. Wife says pension and insurance policies updated last month. Clean hit means everything transfers to her. She's ready to play grieving widow. Thomas sat back against a concrete pillar, the phone's blue light illuminating his face as he processed what he was reading. All this time, he'd been hoping that Tori was being manipulated, that she was another victim of Petrov's schemes. But the evidence in his hands told a different story. His wife had actively conspired to have him killed, believing Petrov would help her eliminate him and take control of his substantial pension and life insurance. The designer clothes, the late meetings, the gradually changing behavior. It hadn't just been about money laundering. It had been about preparing for his murder. The sound of approaching sirens snapped him back to the present. He quickly photographed the key evidence on the phones, then placed an anonymous call to report suspicious activity in the garage. By the time police arrived, he would be long gone, and Petrov's men would be unable to reveal their true purpose without exposing the entire operation. As he drove away, Thomas's mind was already working on the next phase of their plan. The garage confrontation had given them something crucial, hard evidence linking Petrov's organization to multiple criminal enterprises. But it had also forced him to confront a painful truth about his marriage. His phone buzzed with a text from Grace. Evidence secured. Meeting at safe house in 30. Thomas turned his car toward the safe house, his jaw set with determination. The phones from Petrov's men had provided a goldmine of information, but they would need to act quickly before the organization realized something had gone wrong. The safe house was a nondescript 3-story walk-up in Somerville, chosen specifically because it belonged to none of their usual circles. As Thomas parked 3 blocks away and approached on foot, he ran through standard counter-surveillance measures, ensuring he hadn't been followed. Grace met him at the door, her laptop already open on the kitchen table. McKenna and Madeline were there too, their faces illuminated by multiple screens showing surveillance feeds and data streams. The phones? Grace asked immediately, holding out her hand. Thomas passed them over, along with his own phone containing the photos he'd taken of key messages. It's worse than we thought. Tori's not just involved in the money laundering. She's been actively planning. He couldn't finish the sentence. Show me, Grace said quietly, plugging the phones into her computer. As the data downloaded, her eyes widened. My God, Tom. These messages. McKenna moved to look over her shoulder, his expression darkening as he read. Classic sociopath behavior. She's been playing this role for months, maybe years. The financial transfers align with the timeline, Madeline added, pulling up another screen. Look at these life insurance policy adjustments. She's been setting this up methodically. Thomas paced the small kitchen, his ribs aching from the fight. All this time, I thought Petrov was manipulating her, that she was another victim. But she's been a willing participant from the start. People can surprise you, Madeline said softly. Sometimes the ones closest to us are the ones we know the least. The room fell silent as Grace continued extracting data from the phones. Finally, she looked up. We've got enough here to bring down the whole operation. Financial records, contact lists, operational details across all 12 cities. But if we move too soon, they'll scatter, McKenna finished. We need to keep them thinking their plan is still on track. Thomas stopped pacing and leaned against the counter. They'll be expecting those men to report back. When they don't, we've got maybe 12 hours before they realize something's wrong, McKenna calculated. Less if any of them had check-in protocols. So what's our next move? Grace asked, looking at Thomas. Before he could answer, one of the phones buzzed with an incoming message. They all froze, watching as Grace pulled up the text on her screen. It was from Tori. Is it done? Need confirmation for next phase. Thomas felt like he'd been punched in the gut. The clinical detachment in his wife's words, asking about his murder as if it were just another business transaction, made everything suddenly, brutally real. We can use this, Madeline said, her CIA training kicking in. String them along. Make them think the plan is proceeding. McKenna nodded in agreement. But we need to move fast. Set up the counter-operation before they realize those men aren't coming back. Thomas stared at his wife's message, years of memories flashing through his mind. The woman who'd shared his bed, his home, his life. How long had she been planning his death? How many of their moments together had been real, and how many had been carefully calculated steps in her long game? Tom, Grace's voice was gentle. What do you want to do? He straightened up, pushing aside his personal pain. They had work to do, and lives were at stake. We use their own plan against them. Make them think everything's going exactly as they intended. But this time, we control the narrative. The others nodded, recognizing the shift in his demeanor from husband to operator. This wasn't about his marriage anymore. It was about taking down a criminal enterprise that had destroyed countless lives. McKenna pulled up the building schematics they'd been studying earlier. We've got the tactical advantage now. We know their playbook, their personnel, their protocols, and they still think they're hunting a cop, Madeline added. Not a special forces operator with a team of intelligence professionals backing him. Thomas looked at the message from his wife one last time, then turned to Grace. Send a response. Make them believe. It's time to turn the hunters into the hunted. As Grace began crafting the reply that would set their counter-operation in motion, Thomas moved to the window, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. Somewhere out there, his wife was waiting to hear that her husband was dead. She would learn soon enough that she'd made a fatal mistake. She'd underestimated the man she'd married. The night stretched ahead of them, full of possibilities and dangers. They had the evidence they needed, the team was in place, and their opponents had no idea their perfect plan was about to become their undoing. All that remained was to spring the trap. The surveillance room hummed with electronic equipment, dozens of monitors casting a pale blue glow across Grace's concentrated face. She adjusted her headset, fine-tuning the audio feed from the penthouse's hidden microphones. Beside her, Thomas sat motionless, watching the screens with an intensity that made the air feel heavy. Camera 3 is live. McKenna's voice crackled through their earpieces. His team had worked through the night, planting surveillance equipment throughout Tori and Petrov's luxury penthouse in the Back Bay. Audio feeds are clean. Thomas leaned forward as the elevator doors opened on one of the screens. Tori stepped out, followed by Petrov, no longer maintaining his Wade persona in the privacy of their sanctuary. The change in his bearing was striking. Gone was the smooth-talking hedge fund manager, replaced by the calculated movements of a trained operative. Everything's proceeding exactly as planned, Petrov was saying, his Russian accent now clearly evident. He shrugged off his tailored jacket, dropping it carelessly across a leather armchair. The police found exactly what we wanted them to find. Grace's team had carefully staged the garage scene after removing Petrov's unconscious men. Selective evidence, planted witness statements, and a carefully crafted narrative all pointed to Thomas Reeves becoming another tragic statistic. A cop who stumbled into something too big and paid the ultimate price. Tori moved to the bar, her hands steady as she poured 2 glasses of champagne. The diamonds at her throat caught the light as she turned, and Thomas recognized them as the anniversary gift he'd given her just last year. The detective at the scene seemed convinced, she said, her voice carrying a note of satisfaction that made Thomas's stomach turn. They're not looking too closely. Just another failed robbery attempt in a parking garage. Petrov accepted the champagne, raising his glass in a mock toast. You should have seen his face, he laughed, the sound echoing through the surveillance speakers. The great detective, brought down by common thugs. The irony is delicious. Thomas watched his wife's reaction, searching for any sign of remorse, any flicker of the woman he'd loved for 15 years. Instead, he saw only cold calculation as she smiled. He never appreciated what I was capable of, Tori replied, her voice arctic. Always treating me like some trophy wife. Now everything he has is mine. She moved to the floor-to-ceiling windows, gazing out over the Boston skyline. The pension, the insurance payout, the house. All of it transfers automatically. No messy divorce, no drawn-out legal battles. Clean and simple. Grace reached over and squeezed Thomas's arm, offering silent support as they watched the scene unfold. On another screen, they could see McKenna's team taking up positions around the building, waiting for the signal. You've exceeded my expectations, Victoria, Petrov said, moving to join her at the window. When I first approached you about the Morrison development, I wasn't sure you had the constitution for this kind of work. But you've proven to be a...
Subscribe to Cheating Tales Lab for more original and exclusive stories. We hope you enjoy this one. Let's begin. Ethan Blackwood's fingers drummed an impatient rhythm on the steering wheel of his Audi R8 as he navigated the congested downtown streets. The sleek sports car, usually a source of pride, felt like a gilded cage in the stop-and-go traffic. His mind raced, consumed by the forgotten wallet that threatened to derail his $1 million proposal presentation. Damn it, he muttered, glancing at his empty breast pocket for the 100th time. The thought of asking Victoria to bring it down to his office made him wince. He could already hear her sardonic comments about his absent-mindedness. With a sudden jerk of the wheel, Ethan cut across 2 lanes of honking traffic, ignoring the chorus of blaring horns. He'd grab the wallet himself and be back on the road in 10 minutes. No need to give Victoria more ammunition for her little jabs. As he pulled into the private parking area of his luxurious penthouse, Ethan's eyes narrowed at the unfamiliar Porsche 911 parked haphazardly nearby. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up as he approached their door, an unsettling silence greeting him as he entered. "Victoria," he called out, his voice echoing in the vast open-plan living area. No response. The muffled sounds coming from the master bedroom sent a chill down his spine. Ethan's hand hesitated on the doorknob for a split second before he pushed it open. The sight that greeted him sent his world spinning off its axis. A shirtless man, tall and muscular, stood by the bed, carelessly buttoning his pants. His dark hair was mussed, his chiseled features twisted in surprise, and something that looked unsettlingly like amusement. Rage exploded in Ethan's chest. He lunged forward, grabbing the stranger by the collar. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded, his voice trembling with fury. Before the man could answer, a flash of silk caught Ethan's peripheral vision. Victoria rushed out of the ensuite bathroom, cinching a robe around her waist. Her face cycled through shock, defiance, and finally settled on a look of cold detachment that chilled Ethan to his core. "Let him go, Ethan," she said, her voice steady and devoid of any guilt or shame. "This is Xavier Thornton, my new love." Ethan's grip on Xavier's collar loosened, more from shock than compliance. He stumbled back a step, his mind reeling as he tried to process the surreal scene before him. "What was I to you for 13 years, Victoria?" The words tumbled out before he could stop them, raw and vulnerable. Victoria's lips curled into a cruel smile that Ethan had never seen before. It transformed her beautiful face into something alien and malevolent. "A tool, Ethan," she replied, her voice dripping with disdain. "Just a surviving tool. Xavier here is everything you're not, passionate, spontaneous, and exciting." Each word was a dagger, precisely aimed to inflict maximum pain. Ethan felt his chest constrict, struggling to draw breath as the full weight of her betrayal crashed down upon him. Fury coursing through his veins, Ethan ordered them both out of his house. As Victoria gathered her things, she hissed, "I'll make sure you regret this decision, Ethan. You have no idea what I'm capable of." The threat hung in the air as Victoria and Xavier left, the sound of the Porsche's engine fading into the distance. Ethan stood alone in the bedroom, his world shattered around him. The following days passed in a blur for Ethan. He moved through the prestigious architecture firm like a ghost, going through the motions but feeling utterly disconnected. Every sympathetic glance, every hushed conversation that stopped abruptly when he entered a room, felt like salt in his still raw wounds. It was during a particularly grueling meeting that Marcus Steele, Ethan's colleague and best friend at the firm, finally confronted him. As the other partners filed out of the conference room, Marcus hung back, concern etched deep in the lines of his face. "Ethan, what's going on with you, man?" Marcus asked, his voice low and urgent. "You've been off your game all week. That proposal you presented just now, it's not up to your usual standards. Talk to me." Ethan looked up at his friend, seeing the genuine worry in his eyes. The weight of his secret was crushing him, and Marcus's concern finally cracked his resolve. "It's Victoria," Ethan said, his voice barely above a whisper. She's been cheating on me. I walked in on them, Marcus, in our bed." Marcus's eyes widened in shock, then narrowed in anger. "Jesus, Ethan, I'm so sorry. What are you going to do?" As Ethan confided in Marcus, detailing Victoria's threats and his fears, neither man noticed the intern hovering nearby, her eyes wide with interest. By the end of the day, the entire firm would be buzzing with whispers about Ethan Blackwood's scandalous divorce. Meanwhile, Victoria and Xavier began their campaign of harassment against Ethan. They spread malicious rumors in their social circle, claiming Ethan was abusive and controlling. Victoria reached out to Ethan's clients, attempting to tarnish his professional reputation with false accusations. The attacks came from all sides, leaving Ethan reeling. His phone buzzed constantly with messages from concerned friends and colleagues, asking about the rumors. Clients called, demanding explanations for accusations they'd heard. Ethan found himself constantly on the defensive, struggling to maintain his composure and his reputation. As the pressure mounted, Ethan felt increasingly cornered and desperate. The final straw came when he received a call from his bank. Victoria had drained their joint accounts, leaving him nearly penniless. This last betrayal ignited a fierce desire for revenge within Ethan. He realized that playing defense wasn't enough. He needed to fight back. With renewed determination, Ethan reached out to his old college friend, Olivia Chun, now a private investigator. They met at a quiet cafe, away from prying eyes. "Olivia, I need your help," Ethan said, his voice low and urgent. "I need you to dig into Victoria and Xavier's backgrounds. There has to be something I can use against them." Olivia studied him carefully, noting the dark circles under his eyes and the tension in his jaw. "This isn't like you, Ethan." Ethan's eyes hardened. "They've left me no choice, Liv. Victoria's trying to destroy everything I built. I need to protect myself." Olivia nodded slowly. "All right, I'll see what I can find. But Ethan, be careful. Revenge can be a double-edged sword." As Olivia began her investigation, Ethan felt a glimmer of hope for the first time since his world had imploded. He didn't know what Olivia would uncover, but he was certain of one thing. He wouldn't go down without a fight. The spark of revenge had been ignited, and Ethan was ready to fan it into a roaring flame. Olivia Chun sat in her dimly lit office, surrounded by stacks of files and the soft glow of multiple computer screens. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, eyes darting between documents as she pieced together the puzzle of Victoria Blackwood and Xavier Thornton's lives. The deeper she dug, the more her brow furrowed. This was no simple case of infidelity. It was a tangled web of deceit that stretched back years. Her phone buzzed. Ethan's name flashed on the screen. "What have you found?" His voice was taut with barely contained tension. Olivia leaned back in her chair, rubbing her eyes. "You might want to sit down for this, Ethan. It's not good." She heard a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. "Just tell me, Liv." "All right," she said, pulling up a series of documents on her main screen. "Let's start with your wife's lover. Xavier Thornton? That's not his real name. He's actually Xavier Reeves, a known con artist. He's got a history of seducing wealthy women and swindling them out of their money. He's been operating under the radar for years, always managing to stay one step ahead of the law." Ethan's silence was deafening. Olivia continued, her voice softening slightly. "And Victoria, I'm sorry, Ethan, but she's not who you thought she was either. I've uncovered a pattern of infidelity going back at least 5 years. But that's not the worst of it. She's been involved in several fraudulent business dealings. Shell companies, embezzlement, the works." "Jesus Christ," Ethan muttered. How? How did I not see any of this?" Olivia's heart ached for her friend. "These people are professionals, Ethan. They're experts at hiding their tracks. But now we know, and that gives us an advantage." There was a long pause before Ethan spoke again, his voice hardening with resolve. "You're right. Knowledge is power. Send me everything you've got. It's time to fight back." As Olivia compiled her findings into a secure file, her mind raced with the implications. This wasn't just about helping a friend anymore. They were dealing with dangerous criminals. She made a mental note to beef up her own security measures. If Victoria and Xavier got wind of her investigation, things could get ugly fast. Across town, Ethan sat in his sparsely furnished apartment, staring at the laptop screen as Olivia's report populated with document after damning document. Each new revelation felt like a physical blow, but with each hit, his resolve strengthened. He reached for his phone, scrolling through his contacts until he found the name he was looking for. Liam Blackwood, his tech-savvy cousin. If anyone could help him gather the electronic evidence needed to bring Victoria and Xavier down, it was Liam. The phone rang twice before a cheerful voice answered. "Ethan, long time no hear, cuz." "What's up?" Ethan's grip tightened on the phone. "Liam, I need your help. It's bad. Really bad." The cheerfulness drained from Liam's voice, replaced by concern. "What's going on, Ethan? I can't explain everything over the phone. Can you come over? And bring your gear. We've got some digital digging to do." There was a pause. Then Liam's voice came back, firm and determined. "I'm on my way. Hang tight, cuz. Whatever this is, we'll figure it out together." As Ethan ended the call, he felt a glimmer of hope for the first time in weeks. With Olivia's investigative skills and Liam's technical expertise, they had a fighting chance. Victoria and Xavier had no idea what was coming for them. He turned back to the laptop, steeling himself to dive deeper into the sordid details of his wife's double life. Each revelation stoked the fire of his determination. They wanted to play dirty? Fine. He'd show them just how dirty he could get. The following weeks saw Ethan Blackwood undergo a transformation to the outside world. He appeared a broken man, stumbling through his days in a haze of despair. His colleagues at the architecture firm whispered behind his back, their faces etched with a mixture of pity and morbid fascination. But behind closed doors, a different Ethan emerged. With Liam hunched over multiple laptops and Olivia poring over stacks of documents, Ethan's apartment had become a war room. The walls were covered with timelines, connections, and strategies, all aimed at one goal: bringing Victoria and Xavier to justice. "We need to lure them into a false sense of security," Ethan mused, pacing the length of the living room. "Make them think they've won completely." Liam looked up from his screen, eyebrows raised. "You sure about that, cuz? It's gonna mean taking some hits to your reputation." Ethan's jaw clenched. "My reputation's already in tatters thanks to their smear campaign. At least this way, it serves a purpose." Olivia nodded approvingly. "It's a smart play. If they think you're defeated, they might get sloppy, make mistakes." And so, Operation Broken Man began. Ethan started showing up to work disheveled, his eyes red-rimmed as if from crying or drinking. He fumbled presentations, missed deadlines, and generally gave the impression of a man on the verge of a complete breakdown. The whispers in the office grew louder. "Poor Ethan," they'd say. "He's really lost it since Victoria left him." Meanwhile, Victoria and Xavier reveled in their apparent victory. They were spotted at high-end restaurants, luxury boutiques, and exclusive clubs, spending Ethan's money with reckless abandon. Their laughter echoed through the social circles they once shared with Ethan, each public appearance another twist of the knife. But Ethan wasn't as broken as he appeared. Every night he, Liam, and Olivia worked tirelessly, building their case piece by piece. Liam's technical wizardry uncovered a trail of digital breadcrumbs linking Victoria and Xavier to their fraudulent activities. Olivia's network of contacts provided crucial pieces of the puzzle, filling in gaps and corroborating evidence. As their case grew stronger, Ethan realized they needed more. Victims' testimonies could be the nail in the coffin for Victoria and Xavier's operations. With Olivia's help, he began reaching out to those who had fallen prey to the duo's schemes. One name stood out: Sofia Alvarez, Victoria's former business partner. Ethan remembered her vaguely from cocktail parties and charity events, always standing slightly apart from the crowd, her eyes sharp and assessing. He'd always assumed she and Victoria had simply had a falling out. Now, he suspected there was much more to the story. Arranging a meeting with Sofia proved challenging. She was understandably wary, having been burned by Victoria before. But Ethan's persistence paid off, and she finally agreed to meet him at a quiet cafe on the outskirts of town. Sofia arrived precisely on time, her posture rigid and her eyes guarded. She slid into the booth across from Ethan, studying him carefully. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, her voice cool and measured, "I must admit, I was surprised to hear from you. What exactly is it you want from me?" Ethan leaned forward, his voice low and urgent. The truth, Ms. Alvarez. About Victoria. About what really happened between you two. Sophia's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of pain crossing her face before she schooled her features back into neutrality. And why should I dredge up ancient history? What's done is done. Because it's not ancient history, Ethan replied, sliding a folder across the table. It's happening again. Victoria and her new partner, Xavier, are running the same schemes. They've already hurt people. They'll keep hurting people unless we stop them. Sophia's hand trembled slightly as she opened the folder, her eyes scanning the documents within. With each page she turned, her composure cracked a little more. Finally, she looked up at Ethan, her eyes shining with unshed tears. I always wondered if I was the only one, she whispered. If I was just weak, stupid. Ethan reached across the table, gently squeezing her hand. You weren't weak or stupid, Sophia. You were a victim. But now, you have the power to make sure there are no more victims. Will you help us? Sophia took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders. When she met Ethan's gaze again, there was steel in her eyes. Tell me what you need me to do. As Ethan left the cafe, Sophia's agreement to testify secure, he felt a surge of triumph. The trap was set. Now, it was time to spring it. The early morning stillness was shattered by the insistent buzzing of a phone. Special Agent Sarah Donovan fumbled for her cell, squinting at the bright screen. An anonymous tip. Another dead end, probably, but in her line of work, you never knew when a seemingly insignificant lead might crack a case wide open. As she listened to the distorted voice on the other end of the line, her eyes widened. Names, dates, account numbers. Whoever this was, they had serious intel. By the time the call ended, Sarah was wide awake, her mind racing with possibilities. Johnson, she barked, striding into the office an hour later. I need everything we got on a Xavier Reeves, a.k.a. Xavier Thornton, and get me a liaison at the SEC. We might have a big one on our hands. Across town, Ethan Blackwood sat in his car, heart pounding as he ended the call. The burner phone felt heavy in his hand as he tossed it into the passenger seat. There was no going back now. He had just set in motion a chain of events that would either save him or destroy him completely. His phone buzzed his real phone this time. A message from Liam. Package delivered to SC. Ball's in their court now. Ethan allowed himself a smile. Victoria and Xavier had no idea what was about to hit them. The next few days passed in a blur of activity. FBI agents combed through financial records, following the trail of breadcrumbs Ethan and his team had carefully laid out. SEC investigators pored over Victoria's business dealings, uncovering layers of fraud and deceit. Victoria, meanwhile, was beginning to sense that something was amiss. Her carefully crafted world was showing cracks, and she didn't like it one bit. She paced her luxury apartment, phone pressed to her ear. I don't care what it takes, she hissed into the receiver. Find out who's been digging into our affairs and shut them down. Now. But it was too late. The walls were already closing in, and Victoria's desperate attempts to plug the leaks only served to draw more attention to her activities. As the pressure mounted, Victoria made a fatal mistake. In a moment of panic, she attempted to blackmail Ethan with fabricated evidence of misconduct. It was a desperate ploy, a last-ditch effort to regain control of the situation. What Victoria didn't know was that Liam had been working tirelessly to secure Ethan's digital footprint. Every email, every text message, every financial transaction, all of it was backed up and verified. Her clumsy attempt at blackmail fell flat, serving only to add another charge to the growing list of her crimes. Ethan received Victoria's blackmail attempt with a mixture of anger and satisfaction. Anger at her audacity, at the depths of her betrayal, but satisfaction, too, because this was the final piece of the puzzle. With this, they had her dead to rights. He forwarded the blackmail attempt to Agent Donovan, along with Liam's evidence proving its fabrication. Then, he sat back and waited for the hammer to fall. He didn't have to wait long. The next morning, as Ethan sipped his coffee and pretended to review blueprints at work, all hell broke loose. News alerts began popping up on his phone. Prominent businesswoman Victoria Blackwood implicated in massive fraud scheme. Con artist Xavier Reeves, a.k.a. Thornton, wanted by FBI. SEC launches investigation into Blackwood Enterprises. Ethan's colleagues gathered around the break room TV, watching in shock as Victoria's face flashed across the screen, followed by Xavier's. The newscaster's voice was hard as she detailed the charges. Fraud, embezzlement, money laundering, and more. Marcus appeared at Ethan's side, his face a mask of concern. "Ethan, man, did you know about any of this?" Ethan allowed his mask to slip just a little. He let Marcus see a glimpse of the pain, the anger, the satisfaction. "I had my suspicions," he said quietly, "but I never imagined it went this deep." As his co-workers buzzed with shock and speculation, Ethan slipped away to the restroom. He locked himself in a stall, took a deep breath, and allowed himself a moment of pure, unadulterated triumph. They'd done it. The trap had sprung, and Victoria and Xavier were caught right in the middle of it. But Ethan knew better than to celebrate too early. This was just the beginning. Victoria and Xavier were cornered animals now, and there was no telling what they might do in their desperation to escape. As he splashed water on his face, steeling himself for the media frenzy that was sure to follow, Ethan made a silent vow. He would see this through to the end, no matter what it took. Victoria and Xavier had tried to destroy him. Now, they would learn the true meaning of destruction. Xavier Reeves, a.k.a. Xavier Thornton, sat in the first-class lounge of JFK International Airport, his leg bouncing nervously as he checked his watch for the 10th time in as many minutes. His eyes darted around the room, searching for any sign that his hastily laid plans were about to unravel. The burner phone in his pocket buzzed. He fished it out with trembling hands, his heart rate spiking as he read the message from his contact. FBI en route. ETA 10 minutes. Get out now. Shit, Xavier muttered, shoving the phone back in his pocket and grabbing his carry-on. He'd known the walls were closing in, but he hadn't expected them to move this fast. He should have left days ago, but the promise of one last big score had been too tempting to resist. As he strode towards the exit, a flash of red caught his eye. A breaking news cheering scrolled across the bottom of a nearby TV screen. Prominent businesswoman Victoria Blackwood implicated in massive fraud scheme. Xavier froze, his blood running cold. If they had Victoria, it was only a matter of time before she gave him up. Self-preservation had always been her strongest trait. With renewed urgency, he quickened his pace, mind racing as he formulated a new escape plan. He'd need cash, a new identity, maybe a boat to slip out of the country undetected. But first, he had to get out of this damn airport. As Xavier pushed through the revolving doors into the humid New York night, he allowed himself a moment of bitter reflection. Victoria had been a means to an end, nothing more. A convenient mark with deep pockets and useful connections. But in his haste to cut and run, he'd left her to face the music alone. It wasn't personal. It was just business. Across town, Victoria Blackwood paced the polished floors of her penthouse apartment, a glass of scotch clutched in her manicured hand. The TV blared in the background, endlessly repeating the story of her downfall. "This is impossible," she muttered, taking another gulp of the amber liquid. "I covered my tracks. We covered our tracks." But the evidence scrolling across the screen told a different story. Bank records, witness testimonies, surveillance footage. It was all there, laid bare for the world to see. Her carefully constructed facade was crumbling, and Victoria found herself facing a terrifying reality. For the first time in her life, she was truly alone. Her phone had been ringing nonstop for hours. Lawyers, business associates, so-called friends, all wanting answers she couldn't provide. She'd stopped answering after the third call, unable to bear the thinly veiled accusations and hasty distancing. As the scotch burned its way down her throat, Victoria's thoughts turned to Xavier. Where was he? Why hadn't he contacted her? A cold dread settled in her stomach as she realized the truth. He'd abandoned her, just like she'd abandoned Ethan. Ethan, the name sent a jolt through her system. In all the chaos, she'd almost forgotten about her soon-to-be ex-husband. A desperate plan began to form in her mind. If anyone could help her out of this mess, it was Ethan. He'd always been the steady one, the fixer. Surely, if she appealed to their history, the love they'd once shared. With shaking hands, Victoria reached for her phone. She scrolled through her contacts until she found Ethan's name, her thumb hovering over the call button. Taking a deep breath, she pressed it, bringing the phone to her ear. 1 ring, 2 rings, 3. Victoria. Ethan's voice was cold, devoid of any emotion. Ethan, thank God. Victoria breathed, relief flooding her system. I need your help. It's all falling apart, and I don't know what to do. Please. I know I hurt you, but no. The single word cut through her rambling like a knife. What? Victoria asked, thrown off balance by the flat refusal. I said no, Victoria, Ethan repeated, his voice hard as steel. You made your choices. Now you get to live with the consequences. But Ethan, please, Victoria pleaded, desperation creeping into her voice. We were married for 13 years. Doesn't that mean anything to you? There was a long pause on the other end of the line. For a moment, Victoria dared to hope. Then Ethan spoke again, his words dripping with contempt. It meant everything to me, Victoria. But I was just a tool to you, remember? Well, this tool is done fixing your messes. Goodbye. The line went dead, leaving Victoria staring at her phone in disbelief. She'd always prided herself on her ability to manipulate people, to bend them to her will. But Ethan had changed. The man she'd just spoken to was a stranger, cold, unyielding, and completely beyond her reach. As the reality of her situation sank in, Victoria felt the last vestiges of her composure crumble. She sank to the floor, the empty Scotch glass rolling away as sobs racked her body. Outside, sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder with each passing second. The courtroom buzzed with nervous energy as the bailiff called for order. Journalists scrambled for prime positions, their pens poised over notepads, eager to capture every detail of what promised to be the trial of the decade. At the defense table, Xavier Reeves and Victoria Blackwood sat side by side, a study in contrasts. Xavier exuded an air of casual indifference, his handsome features arranged in a mask of bored contempt. Victoria, on the other hand, was a tightly wound spring, her eyes darting nervously around the room as she smoothed non-existent wrinkles from her designer suit. As the judge entered and the court was called to session, a hush fell over the room. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s, approached the bench. Your Honor, the state calls Ethan Blackwood to the stand. A ripple of excitement passed through the spectators as Ethan made his way to the witness box. He cut an impressive figure in his tailored suit, his face a study in calm determination. As he raised his right hand to be sworn in, his eyes briefly met Victoria's. She flinched at the cold steel she saw there, quickly averting her gaze. The prosecutor began her questioning, leading Ethan through the sordid details of Victoria and Xavier's schemes. With each response, Ethan's voice grew stronger, more assured. He painted a vivid picture of betrayal, fraud, and callous disregard for the lives they'd ruined. From her seat at the defense table, Victoria watched in growing horror as Ethan systematically dismantled the life she'd built. Every lie, every manipulation, every fraudulent deal. He laid them all bare, backed by a mountain of irrefutable evidence. Xavier, for his part, maintained his facade of indifference. But those who looked closely might have noticed the slight tremor in his hands, the sheen of sweat on his upper lip. As Ethan's testimony continued, Xavier's eyes darted more and more frequently to the exits, like a cornered animal seeking escape. When it came time for cross-examination, Victoria and Xavier's high-priced defense attorney did his best to poke holes in Ethan's story. But Ethan remained unflappable, his responses measured and precise. For every attempted gotcha, Ethan had a ready answer, often supported by additional evidence that only served to further incriminate the defendants. As the defense attorney returned to his seat, defeat evident in the slump of his shoulders, the prosecutor called her next witness, Sofia Alvarez. Victoria's head snapped up at the name, her eyes widening in shock as her former business partner took the stand. Sofia's testimony was damning, providing intimate details of Victoria's fraudulent business practices and manipulative personality. "She told me it was just creative accounting," Sofia said, her voice thick with emotion. "By the time I realized the truth, it was too late. She'd set me up to take the fall if anything went wrong." As Sofia's testimony continued, Victoria felt the last threads of her defense unraveling. She leaned over to her lawyer, whispering urgently. The attorney frowned, shaking his head, but Victoria persisted. Finally, the attorney stood. "Your Honor, my client wishes to address the court." The judge raised an eyebrow but nodded his assent. Victoria stood, smoothing her skirt with trembling hands. I'd like to make a deal," she said, her voice quavering. "I have information about Xavier, about others involved in our operations. I'm willing to testify, to tell you everything I know." Xavier's head whipped around, his eyes blazing with fury. "You treacherous bitch," he snarled, lunging towards Victoria. The bailiffs rushed to restrain him as chaos erupted in the courtroom. As Xavier was dragged away, hurling threats and obscenities, Victoria locked eyes with Ethan once more. This time, she saw something flicker behind the steely exterior. Not sympathy or forgiveness, but a satisfaction. In that moment, Victoria realized the full extent of her fall. She'd lost everything: her wealth, her status, her freedom. But worst of all, she'd lost the one person who had truly loved her, and there was no going back. The sun was setting over the city skyline, painting the sky in vibrant hues of orange and pink. Ethan Blackwood stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his office, a glass of champagne in hand, watching the play of light on the gleaming skyscrapers. Behind him, the sounds of celebration filled the room. Laughter, the clink of glasses, excited chatter. His team had just landed the biggest contract in the firm's history, a prestigious international project that would put them on the map in a whole new way. "There's the man of the hour," Marcus's booming voice cut through the noise as he approached, clapping Ethan on the shoulder. "How does it feel to be on top of the world, my friend?" Ethan turned, a genuine smile spreading across his face. "It feels pretty damn good, Marcus. We've come a long way." Marcus nodded, his expression growing serious for a moment. "We have indeed. There were times I wasn't sure you'd make it through after. Well, you know." Ethan's mind flashed back to those dark days after Victoria's betrayal, the struggle to keep his head above water as his personal and professional life threatened to implode. He remembered the unwavering support of friends like Marcus, the dogged determination of Olivia as she helped uncover the truth, the technical wizardry of Liam that had been instrumental in bringing Victoria and Xavier to justice. "I couldn't have done it without all of you," Ethan said, raising his glass in a toast. "To friends who become family, and to new beginnings." As if on cue, Olivia appeared at his side, slipping her hand into his. "What are we toasting to?" she asked, her eyes twinkling. Ethan pulled her close, planting a soft kiss on her forehead. "To us," he said simply. "To surviving the storm and coming out stronger on the other side." Olivia's smile widened, a mix of pride and love shining in her eyes. What had started as a professional collaboration during the investigation had blossomed into something neither of them had expected. In Olivia, Ethan had found not just a partner, but a true equal. Someone who challenged him, supported him, and understood him in a way Victoria never had. As the party continued around them, Ethan found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought him to this moment. The pain of betrayal, the thirst for revenge, the long nights spent building a case against those who had wronged him. It all seemed like a lifetime ago. Victoria and Xavier were serving long prison sentences. their empire of lies and fraud dismantled. The victims of their schemes, including Sofia Alvarez, had received restitution and a measure of justice. And Ethan had emerged from the crucible stronger, wiser, and more appreciative of the true riches in his life. "Penny for your thoughts?" Olivia asked, squeezing his hand gently. Ethan shook his head, chuckling softly, just thinking about how sometimes the best revenge is living well. Olivia nodded, understanding flashing in her eyes. "And are you?" "Living well, I mean." Ethan looked around the room, taking in the faces of his friends and colleagues. His gaze settled on Olivia, and he felt a warmth spread through his chest that had nothing to do with the champagne. "You know what?" he said, pulling her closer. "I really am." As the celebration continued into the night, Ethan allowed himself to fully embrace the moment. The past was behind him, the future bright with promise. He had weathered the storm, faced his demons, and come out the other side not just intact, but triumphant. In the end, Victoria's cruel words had proven prophetic, though not in the way she had intended. Ethan had indeed been a tool for justice, for redemption, and ultimately for his own salvation. And as he raised his glass one more time, surrounded by the people who truly mattered, Ethan Blackwood knew that he had finally found the passion, spontaneity, and excitement that had been missing from his life for far too long. The city lights twinkled below, a testament to the endless possibilities that lay ahead. And Ethan was ready to embrace them all, one triumphant step at a time. This is where our story comes to.
Husband publicly exposes wife's 6-year cheating through DNA test and shocking video evidence. One evening, I sat at our table reviewing my daughter Katie's medical forms. Katie was gearing up for kindergarten, so the pediatrician conducted a thorough checkup. Meanwhile, my wife left her school forms spread out on the table. Glancing lazily, I noticed the letter that shattered my marriage. In the blood type column, it read, A. I was frozen for about 10 seconds. I had no clue. Retrieving 2 sheets of paper from our medical records, I confirmed everything matched my recollection. Last summer, both my wife and I donated blood to the Red Cross, receiving receipts indicating our blood types. Here on 2 sheets of paper, mine was B and hers was O. So there was no way Katie could be my daughter if my wife was her mother. And I witnessed Marie give birth to her. Then someone with blood type A had to be the father. The kids were already asleep and Marie was upstairs watching TV. I grabbed a beer from the refrigerator and sat in the backyard, pondering. How did my marriage fare? I'd say okay, pretty typical, both good and bad, depends on what day you ask. During our courtship and early marriage, Marie and I were passionately in love. We were lovemaking constantly, sometimes wildly, even beyond the bedroom. We were always touching, holding hands, walking hand in hand, stroking each other's neck or back as we passed by. Of course, over time, it faded away. Doesn't that happen in every marriage? But now, with proof of her infidelity smacking me right between the eyes, everything I had ever thought about our marriage was on shaky ground. I sat and pondered what changed, gradually or suddenly. It seemed like both. The decline in our bed life was gradual for a while, but about 6 years ago, a few months before Katie was conceived, there were some odd months. Marie, my open and loving wife, was acting very strange. One evening, she returned from work quite late, briefly allowed me to kiss her tenderly, immediately went to the shower, and avoided me for the rest of the evening. The next morning was just as cold and unceremonious, but that night she became completely different. She came home early, cooked a special dinner, tucked me into bed early, and made love to me with an eagerness and passion that I thought we had lost. We hugged happily before going to bed, and Marie told me how much she loved me. Several more times that week, we had passionate lovemaking. Then, the cold night soon happened again. She returned late from work, didn't say a word to me, and quickly took a shower. For the next 2 months, I hardly knew who I married. Marie was passionate and loving. Marie was cold. Marie was attentive. Marie was distant and preoccupied. Marie was patient. Marie was irritable and hot-tempered. I asked her several times if anything had happened, if something between us was bothering her, if there were problems at work, but the only response I received was, "I don't know, Bill. I'm probably just a little nervous. Sorry." When things finally got back to normal after 3 months or so, it was much less pleasant than at the beginning of our marriage. Marie's demeanor shifted, becoming less volatile, yet she seldom displayed affection, and interest in lovemaking waned. Closeness occurred scarcely, maybe once a week, sometimes stretching to a fortnight only upon my insistent request. Any subtle hint, like suggesting we spend the evening together, met with firm rejection. I had to explicitly mention the long hiatus since our last encounter. Marie would comply reluctantly, but it was evident she considered it a favor. Do all marriages follow such a melancholic course? It was the only marriage I knew, so I couldn't say. Naturally, I pondered the cause, entertaining the notion of infidelity. However, Marie soon became pregnant, and our anticipation of the future baby, coupled with the joy of having Katie, eclipsed most of my concerns about our relationship. After Katie's birth, fatigue consumed us, making Marie's disinterest in lovemaking more understandable, though I remained dissatisfied. When Katie turned 3, Marie conceived again, and we welcomed Brian just after Katie's 4th birthday. Bill and Marie, once passionate partners, transformed into parents of 2 delightful yet exhausting children. We cherished our kids. Despite realizing my discontent with our marriage and our minimal bed life, I didn't acknowledge it then. Perhaps I believed it was typical for couples with young children. Armed with the shocking revelation that my daughter wasn't biologically mine, the events from 6 years ago didn't seem as enigmatic. Marie likely initiated an affair around that time. It clarified her distant behavior and sudden showers. The subsequent passionate closeness and warmth could be attributed to guilt, or, if I were charitable, an effort to maintain marital harmony while continuing the affair. As I sat in the yard under the darkening sky, my initial shock transformed into seething anger. My beloved wife not only betrayed me, but also bestowed another man's child upon me. Perhaps even Brian wasn't mine. If my sole intent then was to punish Marie, I would have stormed inside, presented the evidence of blood types, coerced her confession, and expelled her deceitful self onto the street. But it wasn't that simple. I cherished my children regardless of their biological origins. If we divorced, Marie would likely gain custody once the truth emerged. I contemplated. I asked myself, what do I desire? The answers were surprisingly lucid. Firstly, I yearned to uncover Marie's actions in detail. Was it a brief affair? Did she know Katie wasn't mine, or was she aware of everything, engaging in a clandestine affair for years? Secondly, I resolved to raise my children as my own, shielding them from the truth of their parentage. Once I established my objectives, mapping out how to achieve them surprisingly felt straightforward. Upon returning home, I noticed cotton swabs leading to each of the children's rooms. I carefully obtained swabs from inside their cheeks without disturbing their sleep, wrapping each one separately. I designated Katie as number 2, and Brian as number 3. Then I headed to the kitchen, where I fixed a swab onto my cheek and marked it as number 1. Having a friend employed in a university chemistry lab, I arranged for DNA testing, marking the initial phase of information collection. Upon receiving the first results, my subsequent actions became clear. A week later, my friend contacted me, unaware of whose samples they were. I informed him of acquaintances sharing the same last name, speculating on distant relations. "Hi, Bill," he began. "Your numbers 2 and 3 are undoubtedly siblings, while number 1 is unrelated to them. It seems these individuals aren't your cousins after all." I expressed gratitude before hanging up. So, Katie and Brian were indeed siblings, sharing the same parents. Marie had 2 children with this mysterious man, but did she know? Surely she knew she was involved with him, but was she aware he fathered our children? There was a simple way to find out. I approached Marie in the kitchen, initiating the conversation. Without turning around, she encouraged me to continue. "A colleague of mine has a biologist friend conducting DNA research requiring samples from related individuals. I volunteered to provide samples from you, me, and each of the children. I'll handle the kids before bedtime, and then we'll do ours. Sound good?" I observed Marie closely as I explained. Halfway through, she tensed, nearly dropping a pan. She regained composure and continued washing. After I finished, there was a moment of silence before she turned to face me. "I'm not entirely comfortable with this idea, Bill. How do we know what the biologist will do with the samples? Can we trust our information will remain confidential?" I began to counter her concerns, but she abruptly objected. "No, I'm not keen on this idea. Please inform your colleague we won't participate." "All right, honey," I replied softly. Regardless, it was fine. Her reaction told me all I needed to know. My next move was to unearth details about her affair, or affairs. Who, where, and when. Perhaps even why. It was plausible that Marie had concealed something within our house that could provide a clue, but I required sufficient time to conduct a thorough search. That Saturday, we had plans to visit her parents' house for the afternoon. A few minutes before our departure time, I entered the bedroom, dialed our home number on my cell phone. then pretended to engage in a conversation with my boss at work. Upon completing the call, I approached Marie. "Honey, I apologize, but there's a crisis at work and they urgently need me for at least 4 hours today. Otherwise, the company will face serious issues."
Damn it, Bill. My parents are eager to see their grandchildren.
"I understand," I reassured her. "I'm truly sorry. You go ahead, just convey my apologies. You and the kids will have a good time. I'll prepare myself some dinner and I'll see you in the evening." She accepted the change in plans without further objection, and soon found herself in the car with the children. Now I had ample time to systematically search the house. I concluded that searching in the usual spots where I frequent would be futile, since Marie was unlikely to hide anything there. Therefore, I bypassed the kitchen, bookshelves, living room, and so forth. I also disregarded my bedroom and bathroom areas, but thoroughly inspected all sections of her closet and dresser drawers. The discovery that caught me off guard was a pair of very alluring lingerie pieces that I had never seen her wear. They were discreetly tucked away in the back corner, beneath everyday items, suggesting her desire to keep them concealed from me. Only the children's rooms and the attic remained unsearched. Reasoning that the children's rooms were less probable, I ascended into the attic. There, I found various forgotten pieces of furniture, a couple of lamps, and several boxes of items predating our wedding. With so much to inspect, I decided to focus on the 3 boxes situated to the side. One of them appeared less dusty than the others, indicating recent handling. Upon closer examination, I observed that these boxes had been moved more recently compared to the rest of the attic clutter, which seemed untouched for years. Consequently, I directed my attention to these 3 boxes and uncovered everything I sought. They contained Marie's old possessions, predominantly letters from college friends and acquaintances. Among these items, I discovered a collection of letters and mementos from myself, including affectionate greeting cards. Deep within one of the boxes, strategically hidden beneath aged papers, lay a slim stack of more recent notes and 2 unlabeled videotapes. Retrieving them, I brought them downstairs for further scrutiny. A mere 20 minutes spent reviewing the notes provided me with nearly all the information I needed. It became apparent that Marie had been unfaithful to me with Harry, her office boss. The affair seemingly commenced about 3 months prior to Katie's conception, coinciding with the period when Marie exhibited unusual and erratic behavior at home. All the letters were from Harry to Marie, and they were harsh and forceful. There was no affection in them, just a lot of desire. Right from the start, their relationship seemed almost like a dominant-submissive dynamic, with Harry dictating terms. Some letters instructed her on how to dress for specific occasions. In others, he detailed exactly how they would engage in closeness the next time they stayed late at work. A few notes congratulated her on the birth of their children, and derisively referred to me as a naive fool who unknowingly was raising his offspring. It was evident he had no intention of acknowledging his children. I knew he was happily married to a woman named Caroline, and they had 3 children of their own. Apparently, Caroline was oblivious to his affair, just as I was. My jaw clenched as I read. It was clear Harry held sway over Marie, but she willingly acquiesced. There was no suggestion of coercion or blackmail. She seemed to relish playing this role for him and being directed. Moreover, it was apparent they both knew the true paternity of Marie's children, and they seemed to revel in the clandestine knowledge they held over me. From these letters, I couldn't glean much about Marie, however. There was now no doubt she had been deceiving me for over 6 years and intentionally conceiving children with another man while masquerading as my loving spouse. I had been seething with anger for days, but these letters fueled it further. My plans for retribution would also encompass Harry. After a moment's pause, I took the tapes to the VCR and began to watch. Both depicted Harry and Marie engaged in love-making acts. The earlier one, judging by Marie's hairstyle, seemed to be filmed in an unfamiliar room, possibly Harry's residence. The more recent one was filmed in my own bedroom. I wondered when Marie had the opportunity for this. It occurred to me that I had taken several business trips over the past year, and perhaps she had left the children with her parents during those times. Overall, the recordings confirmed Harry's carnal dominance over Marie and her enthusiastic compliance. The lighting wasn't bright, but they were both clearly visible, and the sound quality was remarkably clear. I could hear every word, every moment. On the first tape, right from the start of their affair, I heard Harry issuing commands. He sat on the bed and instructed Marie to perform a seductive striptease, which she did with a smile. The closeness was rough, lacking gentleness or affection, and his language was coarse. It saddened me to see that Marie clearly enjoyed what she was receiving. The second tape featured similar lovemaking scenes, but with some new, intriguing dialogue. They were lying on the bed. Marie asked Harry why he didn't mind me raising his children, and he responded, Bill is decent enough, and as you say, he's fond of children. I have 3 of my own, and I don't really care beyond that. If it weren't for that, he continued, I would have told you to leave him long ago. What does he offer besides changing diapers? That's not fair, Harry, Marie replied. Bill is a good and kind person. He genuinely loves me and provides for me and the children. And that's why you let me have my fun with you all these years, right? She smiled at him and playfully hit his arm. You've never been as gentle and caring as Bill, and that's probably why I'm so drawn to you. Yes, baby, I give you what you want, he replied. Now let's get on with it before I have to leave. After finishing both films, I sat down and pondered how arrogant they both were. Not only to write these letters, but also to be careless enough to leave them, and Harry's notes, where I could discover them. My retaliation would be complete, directed at both of them. I utilized a scanner to digitize each note onto my hard drive. Then, employing sophisticated software borrowed from work for a project I had undertaken last summer, I transformed each videotape into a digital file on my hard drive for future editing. After finishing, I stowed the records and tapes in the trunk of my car, concealing them beneath the spare tire. Lastly, I tidied up the attic, meticulously restoring everything to its original place to ensure Marie remained unaware of my presence. Over the ensuing 2 weeks, I methodically devised and executed my schemes. Surprisingly, it was far easier than anticipated for me to be utterly deceptive towards Marie, behaving as if nothing out of the ordinary had occurred. I realized she had been deceiving me for 6 years, so why should I struggle to reciprocate? Thus, I remained kind and affectionate, attending to the children's needs, showing Marie the same tenderness as before, and even initiating closeness on a couple of occasions. However, I did so cautiously, making it easier for her to decline. Truthfully, I had no desire to touch her again. A significant event loomed in Marie's life. She had been elected as the new president of the Key Society, a prominent charity in our city, and was set to assume office at a luncheon where she would deliver a speech outlining the charity's plans for the upcoming year. Having served on the Key Society board for 3 years, Marie was deeply honored by her appointment as president. Nervous about her presentation, she sought my assistance in crafting the PowerPoint she intended to use. This presented a golden opportunity for me. For about a week, I collaborated with her every evening, allowing her to showcase her slides and other materials while helping her organize them into a cohesive presentation. She rehearsed this routine several times in the month leading up to her big day, and each rehearsal went smoothly. Simultaneously, I prepared my own entirely distinct PowerPoint presentation, poised to replace hers. The night before the luncheon, I deleted Marie's file and substituted it with mine. Additionally, I added a password so that, once the file began running, she wouldn't be able to disable it. All that remained was to ensure that Marie had invited Harry and his wife to the luncheon. I casually inquired, and she confirmed they would be attending. On the appointed evening, I felt as excited as Marie, albeit for different reasons. Arriving early, Marie, resplendent in a sleek black evening gown, looked breathtaking. I assisted her in setting up the laptop and conducted a couple of tests to ensure smooth playback. We all savored a delightful dinner and listened to some introductory speeches. Marie was warmly introduced by the outgoing president, and she approached the podium, appearing shy yet proud as applause filled the room. She began speaking and initiated the PowerPoint presentation. Initially, it proceeded as expected, showcasing photos of the Society's charitable endeavors and financial data. Then, according to my plan, it took an unexpected turn. Suddenly, a series of still images appeared, frames I had extracted from 2 videos, depicting a couple engaged in various carnal positions. Though some photos were dimly lit, the overall impression of 10 or 12 of them confirmed they featured Marie and Harry. For a few minutes, Marie continued discussing key social issues. However, she noticed the sudden murmur from the audience, prompting her to glance at the screen behind her. Gasping, she accidentally knocked over a glass of water onto the podium. Momentarily frozen in shock, she then flushed crimson with embarrassment, frantically attempting to halt the presentation by pressing buttons on her laptop. By then, the still photos had transitioned into brief video clips. "How will you prevent Bill from discovering I'm carrying your child?" Harry's voice declared. "As long as I let him have his way occasionally, he won't suspect anything." "But not too often, baby," Harry's voice continued. "You're mine." The room erupted in noise. Laughter and cheers reverberated from every table. Marie stood in disbelief, too stunned to even feel embarrassed. Nearby, Caroline, Harry's wife, seized a vase of flowers, smashed it over Harry's head, and stormed out amid the commotion. Gradually, the guests dispersed from the ballroom, exchanging gestures and reliving the astonishing scene. Surprisingly soon, Marie and I were alone. She stood, defeated and bewildered, on the podium while I sat at a table 10 feet away, wearing a broad smile and gazing up at her. Finally, she met my eyes with a look of profound sadness. "Bill, how could you betray me like this? I thought you loved me." Given the circumstances, her question struck me as absurd. I couldn't help but burst into laughter before exiting the room. Still, no, not at all. It was merely a fanciful notion. The entire town would soon learn Harry was the father of my children, potentially leading to their loss and the divorce. Moreover, they would likely resent being labeled as Marie's illegitimate offspring. No, I should have been more discreet, and I acted first. I consulted a divorce lawyer, having met him previously, and prepared documents for future use. Then I crafted the precise PowerPoint presentation I had described. However, I didn't wait until Marie's scheduled dinner to unveil it. Instead, I arranged for Marie to view it herself one evening, 4 weeks before the dinner event. After the children had gone to bed, I called Marie. "Honey, I'd like you to take a look at the draft of the PowerPoint I prepared for your speech next month." "Can't it wait, Bill?" she snapped, visibly exhausted. "I'm absolutely spent today." "No, dear," I asserted firmly. "I need to review what changes are necessary so I can address them promptly. Please remember that I dedicate my free time to these tasks for your benefit." With that, I escorted her into the office and seated her in front of the computer. "Simply press A when you're ready and the file will commence on its own," I instructed, inwardly smiling. I monitored her closely. Initially, everything proceeded smoothly as she rehearsed her remarks on the initial slides about the society. Then her demeanor shifted abruptly. She gasped, her face draining of color, as she beheld still images of herself and Harry engaged in love-making acts. She turned to me, mouth agape, but uttered no sound. I maintained a neutral expression. Next, video clips surfaced, featuring conversations about Harry's paternity of her children and his deliberate deception of me, interspersed with more love-making scenes. Despite Marie's frantic attempts to halt the file, I prevented it, and the screen went dark. This sequence lasted about 2 minutes. Marie slumped in the chair, head bowed. She couldn't muster the courage to meet my gaze. Quietly relishing her distress, I waited. Eventually, she spoke, lifting her head to look at me. In that moment, she appeared to age 20 years. "Bill, Bill, I'm so sorry," she cried. "I truly am. Can you ever forgive me?" "Forgive you?" I responded coldly. "For what?" "Let's see. For carrying on an affair with Harry Dorner for the past 6 years of our marriage? For bearing his children and deceiving me into believing they were mine? For mocking and disparaging me behind my back? For refusing closeness at Harry's behest? Is that what you want forgiveness for?" Her sobs intensified. "Bill, I don't love him. It's you I love, always have," she sobbed. My anger remained icy, contained. I said nothing but inwardly thought, "No, Marie, that's nonsense. You love our comfortable life together. You enjoy my devotion, my care for the children, but you don't love me. No woman who loves her husband would betray him as you have." I reclined and allowed her tears to flow. I took satisfaction in her anguish, maintaining silence throughout the 20 minutes it took her to cry. Eventually, she sobbed several times, wiped her tear-streaked face, and looked at me. "What will you do, Bill? Are you going to divorce me?" "No, Marie, I won't do that," I lied. "I care too much about Katie and Brian, even if they aren't biologically mine." I let the statement hang in the air briefly before continuing. "But things will be drastically different from now on. You can count on that. Let's begin immediately. Summon that idiot, Harry, and tell him to be here in 15 minutes. Horror flickered across her face. "But I can't do that. He's at home with his wife and children. He won't come," she protested. I smiled. "Say whatever you must, but summon him here. Inform him that if he fails to arrive within 15 minutes, his marriage will be dissolved by tomorrow." She glanced at me, perhaps apprehensive of the coldness in my expression. Then, without uttering another word, she headed to the kitchen and contacted her paramour. When Harry arrived, he offered the soft, insincere smile I anticipated. Marie must have briefed him on the situation, as he appeared anxious and uneasy. "Come into the office and have a seat, Harry. And you too, Marie. We need to discuss something," I directed. Once we were all seated, I wasted no time. "All right, Harry, here's the deal. You've been enjoying yourself with Marie for quite some time, making a fool out of me. That ends now. Everything has changed, and it's time for you to face the consequences." Before he could respond, I interjected. "Sit, watch, and listen." I navigated through the PowerPoint presentation, relishing Harry's horrified reaction to its contents. When the presentation concluded, an unsettling silence ensued. I think I relished it more than they did. "Now, You will do as I say, precisely as I say, or your blissful marriage to Caroline will come to a sudden and public end. Understood? Don't speak, just nod your head. He begrudgingly complied, wearing a scowl. Good. Now listen up and keep your mouth shut. I have several documents for you to sign. I'll give them to you one by one. You might want your lawyer to review them, so I'm giving you 48 hours to return them to me signed. Or Caroline will be treated to a brief viewing of a certain video. The first document acknowledged that he was the biological father of Katie and Brian, and committed him to paying child support for them until they turned 21, plus a lump sum for college. The amounts were specified. $110,000 per child per year, along with $100,000 per child in their first year of college. The funds will be placed in a trust fund for which I am the sole trustee, authorized to utilize it as needed for the children's welfare. Harry leapt from his seat in fury. Listen, Bill, this is utter nonsense. I have no intention. I forcefully pushed him back into the chair. Shut your mouth, Harry. We both know you're wealthy. This isn't your show anymore, it's mine. You have no say now. Keep quiet until I permit you to speak. I noticed Marie looking at me across the room, a mix of horror and disbelief on her face. This was a facet of her loving husband she had never witnessed before. The second document grants me permission to adopt the children. Both you and Marie must sign it. I'll ask her to do so once you've returned it to me. The third is a declaration renouncing your parental rights to Katie and Brian and vowing never to disclose your paternity. Lastly, this is a personal admission of workplace carnal intimidation against my wife by you. What? Harry sprang up again. That's a complete lie. She wanted it as much as I did. Sit down, Harry, I commanded solemnly. Perhaps, but Marie will still sign a carnal intimidation complaint against you. It's one of my conditions to refrain from divorcing her. Clear, Marie? I inquired, turning to her. Marie gazed from me to Harry, her expression fraught with fear. She remained silent. Allow me to elucidate, I addressed them both. I have no intention of utilizing any of these documents. They serve as my insurance, Harry, in the event you consider shirking your financial responsibilities to your two children or entertain the notion of disclosing their true fraternity. I handed Marie the carnal intimidation complaint drafted by my lawyer. Sign it. Marie, still visibly frightened, silently accepted the pen from my hand and affixed her signature to the complaint at the bottom. Now, Harry, we're nearing the end of today's meeting. I expect those signed documents back in my possession within 48 hours. You can bring them here to the house. And if you ever entertain any dark, insane notions like injuring me, rest assured that several copies of your incriminating notes and love letters to Marie are securely stored, with instructions for their exposure should anything happen to me. With a tone of contempt, I concluded, locking eyes with him. Taking Marie's hand, I guided her back into the office and seated her. I had never seen her like this before. She trembled with horror. It's all right, Marie. I would never damage you. There's no need to be afraid. My God, Bill, what's gotten into you? How could you do this to Harry? She exclaimed. I regarded her with some surprise. You don't understand, Marie. Don't you see what he's done to you? To us, it's despicable and unjust. She blushed. Yes, I see. It's just, you seem so angry, like you've lost control. Having no immediate response, I remained silent for a moment. Marie, I've told you I won't divorce you, but our marriage won't continue the same way. From now on, things will be drastically different. Do you understand? Yes, Bill. I'll do anything to make things right. What have I done to you? She pleaded. All right, I relented. Let's establish a couple of conditions. Within 2 weeks, you'll find a new job. I won't tolerate you seeing Harry every day at work, and it goes without saying, you'll have no personal contact with him ever again. No touching, kissing, lovemaking, calls, emails, nothing. Furthermore, if our marriage persists, it'll be on a wholly new basis. I refuse to endure your bad moods, your aloofness. I expect you to be a joyful, kind, loving wife every day. Your actions will demonstrate your love for me and your gratitude for our marriage. That same wild, passionate closeness you shared solely with Harry, I expect to share with me now. I anticipate seeing you in the hot lingerie I've never witnessed, tucked away in your drawer. I glanced at her pointedly, and she averted her gaze in shame. And I expect you to be eager and willing whenever I desire closeness. If you truly love me, Marie, you have much lost time to compensate for. She crossed the room and knelt at my feet, embracing my legs tightly and looking up at me. I love you, Bill, more than words can express. I'll prove it to you, I promise. I observed her tear-stained face, her frightened eyes. Somewhere within me, fragments of the love and devotion I held for this woman lingered, yet they were overshadowed, rendered insignificant by my fury at her selfishness and deceit. She deserved whatever consequences awaited her. Softening my tone slightly, I said, "Listen, Marie. In 4 weeks, your social dinner will take place. Let's use these weeks to start anew, to forge something different, perhaps even better, from our marriage. If all goes well, the dinner will be a celebration of our new beginning. What do you say?" She nodded, holding onto my legs tightly. "Yes, Bill. Thank you. Thank you for giving me a chance. I'll be whatever you need me to be." I drew her close, and she showered me with tears and kisses. "Give me 10 minutes to freshen up, and then I'll start making things right," she said, rising with a smile. After she left, I relaxed in my chair, amused as I watched Marie bend over backward to please me. The next 4 weeks were bound to be enjoyable. I was a bit surprised she didn't notice what I didn't do. Ask her anything about the affair's details. The whole evening must have been such a shock that she didn't have time to dwell on it, but honestly, I didn't ask because I simply didn't care. I was finished with Marie, even if she didn't realize it yet. Entering the bedroom minutes later, I found the bed made, the lights dimmed, and Marie lying in a revealing red nightgown. She had freshened up, looking as stunning as ever, albeit visibly nervous. I noticed a bottle of lube on the nightstand. "Where are you?" she purred, her voice trembling slightly. "Come to me." I joined her, shedding my clothes, and we embraced, kissing passionately. Her body was eager, and she moved with excitement. Whether it was genuine or an act, I enjoyed it. Despite my anger toward Marie, I found myself immersing in pleasure with her. She had a beautiful body, and her impatience was exhilarating, especially after years of indifference. I lay back and let her take charge, which she seemed happy to do. Afterward, she turned off the light and cuddled up to me under the blanket. She kissed my neck gently and whispered, "Sleep well." Drifting off, I anticipated receiving similar attention over the next 4 weeks. I genuinely enjoyed the subsequent weeks as Marie dedicated herself to rebuilding our marriage. The next morning, she woke me with a cheerful smile and a loving kiss, offering some love-making morning pleasure before breakfast. I watched with interest as Marie went above and beyond her usual routine to prepare the children for their day. That evening, I returned home to an unusual meal. Marie had decided to cook from a cookbook recipe. Though the kids weren't fans, I enjoyed it, and Marie took charge to ensure they bathed and went to bed on time so we could enjoy our evening. Our nightly encounters were a refreshing change. Marie wore another enticing nightgown, and we indulged in unhurried closeness. Her enthusiasm, affection, and energy remained consistent. Despite my inner turmoil, I couldn't help but observe how we portrayed a happy newlywed couple each day. Marie's affection remained steadfast. She exuded cheerfulness and assistance in the mornings, and she was equally playful with our children and during love-making moments. The allure of new seductive lingerie gained my full endorsement, and we explored several exciting new positions, finding some to be thoroughly satisfying. My life resembled a joyful illusion, though I harbored no trust in my wife. Seething with anger beneath my facade of contentment, I merely feigned reciprocal affection. Harry's papers arrived promptly in my mailbox, followed by Marie's swift consent to adoption, facilitated by my lawyer. That same week, he orchestrated a private hearing with a judge, and within 10 days the legal adoption was finalized. Subsequently, my lawyer handled the divorce proceedings. One morning at work, Denise Reynolds, a colleague with whom I occasionally collaborated, paid me an unexpected visit. At 28, she was 5 years my junior and undeniably attractive. While her occasional flirtatious remarks hadn't caught my serious attention before, she was definitely someone I considered in my circle of potential partners. To my surprise, Denise's visit wasn't work-related. "Bill," she said, "you seem different lately. Have you been working out or something? You look younger or fitter." "Thanks for noticing, Denise," I replied with a smile, then impulsively added, "Actually, it's something else entirely, but not something I can discuss here. Perhaps we could grab lunch today." "Sounds good," she agreed. We went to the salad bar, then took our lunches to a table in the park and enjoyed the sun while we ate. "The change you've noticed is probably due to the fact that my marriage is falling apart," I explained. She looked puzzled. "And this makes you look better? Explain, please." I offered her a condensed version of my situation, admitting, "My wife has been cheating on me with a coworker for some time now. I intervened, but I've already made up my mind to leave her in a few weeks. Meanwhile, she's treating me like royalty, both in and out of the bedroom. That's the difference you've noticed today." Denise regarded me thoughtfully. "I'm impressed with how you're handling it," she remarked. "When I found out about my ex's infidelity, I nearly fell apart. It took me months to regain my composure." "I'm sorry to hear that," I responded. "I didn't know you went through something similar. But right now, I'm taking charge of my situation. It's going to unfold on my terms, not someone else's. That's what's keeping me going." Once again, muttering what the hell to myself, I remarked that one of the perks of my situation was knowing that, although I wasn't officially single yet, I soon would be. Consequently, I felt no need to hold back my admiration for the delightful lady beside me in the park. I glanced at her with a smile, causing her to blush slightly before looking away and then back at me. "Gosh, Bill, you've put me in a bit of a spot here. I didn't realize it was so straightforward," she said. "I'm sorry, Denise, but you're just so lovely and amusing. I've been drawn to you since we first met. It's just that, until now, it felt taboo to bring it up. Any chance you'd join me for dinner on Saturday?" "I know this charming little Italian spot with a view of the river," I proposed. She regarded me earnestly. "Bill, I like you too, and being with you has always been effortless. Can I trust you? Is your marriage truly over, or is this just a ploy to get into my pants? Forgive me, but I've been through this scenario before. Denise, I've always been honest with you, and as you're aware, I've never made advances before. I'm ending things with Marie in about 2 weeks and filing for divorce the same day. There's no turning back now, but I'll understand if you want to push me away." "I'll just be a tad disappointed," I confessed. She smiled. "No, Bill, since you've made the offer, I'm ready to accept it before you change your mind." Her gaze met mine intensely, and after a brief hesitation, I leaned forward and we shared a gentle, tender kiss. It wasn't fiery or passionate, but it felt like a beautiful promise. Afterward, I beamed at her like an ecstatic child. When I informed my wife of my plans for a date on Saturday night, it brought out the worst in me. I made it crystal clear that I'd be going out with another woman and expected her to stay home with the kids. "Bill," Marie was shocked, on the verge of tears, "but I've tried so hard. Think of something to salvage our marriage. Or how can you see someone else?" "It's simple, Marie. Not only did you see someone else, but you also had an affair with him behind my back for 6 years. You've been making an effort lately, and I appreciate that, but it doesn't mean you automatically deserve my unwavering loyalty. It's pretty evident that I'll need to find happiness elsewhere for a while before we can even consider reconciliation," I retorted. She began to cry softly. "Will you sleep with her?" she asked. "No, but I can, and that's something you'll have to come to terms with. If it hurts you. Maybe it'll help you understand the pain you've caused me," I concluded, ending the conversation as I left the room. My initial outings with Denise were delightful, yet cautious, as we both proceeded with care. We savored the moments, sensing there was more than mere physical attraction between us. We conversed, laughed, vented about co-workers, shared childhood stories, and simply grew acquainted. It felt natural and effortless, occasionally evoking memories of my early days with Marie, a thought I tried to push aside despite the pang of sadness it brought. Following our third dinner together, as I opened Denise's car door outside her apartment, she softly inquired, "Do you want to come in?" We understood the implication, and instantly desire surged through me. Upon entering, she embraced me eagerly, and we kissed and hugged passionately, like infatuated teenagers. She paused for a moment, pulling back slightly, and expressed seriously, "I really want this, Bill, but I'm quite nervous. It's been a while. Please be gentle and patient with me." "Of course," I reassured her with a smile, lifting her gently. "Which way to your bedroom?" Closeness with Denise was remarkable, yet markedly different from my recent experiences with Marie. Initially reserved, Denise allowed me to explore and caress her body at my own pace. Despite her initial shyness, her beauty captivated me, and every moment with her was cherished. Our first encounter was tender, unhurried, and brimming with affection, a stark contrast to the passionate encounters I shared with Marie. It felt like two individuals genuinely caring for each other and finding happiness together. Afterward, Denise kissed me tenderly and asked if I could stay the night, to which I gladly agreed. And we drifted off to sleep wrapped in each other's arms. The following morning, Denise seemed slightly embarrassed again, and though we refrained from lovemaking, we bid farewell with sincere tenderness, exchanging several tender kisses. With only a few days remaining until my impending wedding night with Marie, I chose not to divulge my plans to Denise but assured her of my imminent divorce proceedings. Upon returning home around 9:30 that Saturday morning, I found Marie quietly weeping at the kitchen table, clearly aware of how I had spent the previous night. Though I feigned sympathy more than I truly felt, I tenderly embraced her. "I'm sorry, Marie. I understand how you're feeling, believe me." "Oh, Bill, this is just awful. The mere thought of you with another woman tears me apart. I've been so selfish all these years. How could I not consider your feelings and the impact of my actions?" Looking at me, she added, "Thank you. Thank you for giving me another chance." Marie's own significant night, much like mine, was fast approaching, and to some extent I couldn't help but feel a twinge of regret. The past 4 weeks with Marie, including the fulfilling closeness we shared, had been memorable, and I would miss them. However, nothing she did managed to quell my resentment and fury. Her profound betrayal exceeded any attempt at reconciliation. Upon reflection, my heart harbored only a minuscule amount of love for her and a scant drop of sympathy for her impending fate. While collaborating on a PowerPoint presentation for her speech, I clandestinely crafted my own rendition. It wasn't identical to hers. I needed to conceal Harry's identity as the children's father. Nevertheless, the overall strategy remained unchanged. Using a sequence of photographs and captivating videos, I arranged the laptop so that Marie's presentation would appear whenever she used it. Yet, with a specific key combination, I could lock her presentation and substitute it with my own special file. In the days leading up to the event, and on the evening itself, Marie nervously inquired if I had erased the dreadful file she encountered 4 weeks earlier. With a tender smile each time, I reassured her it was gone. I would then demonstrate that her presentation was intact and would seamlessly play with a simple click. The final days at home were particularly bittersweet. Marie seemed increasingly convinced she was regaining my affection, her devoted gestures appearing more composed yet tinged with desperation. Her anguish upon realizing I spent the entire night with Denise only fueled her determination. Knowing our charade was nearing its conclusion, I savored every fleeting moment. When the pivotal evening arrived, we arrived early, me donning a rented tuxedo and Marie, stunning in a black evening gown with delicate spaghetti straps accentuating her neck and shoulders. We ran through her PowerPoint presentation twice to ensure everything was flawless. As she leaned over to stow her purse beneath the podium, I swiftly input the key combination, signaling that everything was in place. As anticipated, everything unfolded precisely as I had orchestrated. We enjoyed a pleasant dinner, engaging in friendly conversation with our friends at the table. The initial greetings were somewhat dull, but then Marie was warmly introduced by the outgoing president. Nervously, she made her way to the podium amidst general applause. According to my watch, her excitement and happiness lasted precisely 54 seconds. The time between the start of the PowerPoint file and the moment her audience was confronted with still photos of her infidelity. Marie didn't freeze or spill her water, but she turned to me with horror and disbelief before frantically attempting to halt the file's playback, albeit unsuccessfully. As video clips began playing, filling the room with sound, she stood there visibly distressed, her face flushed, gaze fixed on the floor. She made no attempt to respond as the audience's surprise turned into a mix of indignation and laughter, ignoring the lewd remarks hurled at her. As the crowd dispersed minutes later, we found ourselves alone. I sat quietly observing her from across the table. Finally, she uttered the question straight out of my nightmares. "Bill, how could you do this to me? I thought you loved me." "Yes, Marie," I replied calmly. "In these past few weeks, I've loved you just as much as you loved me 6 years ago." I approached the podium and handed her several folded sheets of paper. "I'm filing for divorce. Consider yourself served. If you stay in town, you'll have joint custody of Katie and Brian. Otherwise, I'll fight for full custody, and you know I'll win." As I neared the door, her scream of anger and pain pierced the air. "But you promised you wouldn't divorce me." "You said we could work things out." I turned to face her. "Yes, Marie," I said firmly. "So I suppose, after all these years of you deceiving me, I deceived myself."
Hello everyone. My name is Jennifer. I didn't grow up rich, but I still managed to get a job and get married. My husband's name is Max, and he works at a fancy hotel. I thought my life would be a fairy tale, but things didn't turn out that way. My childhood home wasn't wealthy. We didn't have a lot of money, but I don't blame my parents at all. They gave up nice things for me, took me to fun places, and taught me about different cultures. Maybe they loved geography, but as a kid, I often thought they were trying too hard for me. I didn't want my parents to worry about me anymore, so I decided to start working right after middle school. My mom would say, "You should at least finish high school. It might be hard to find a job without it." My dad would agree, saying, "Yes, we have enough money saved to send you to high school." I was really happy about how my parents felt, but more than that, I wanted to make life easier for them as soon as possible. "It's okay, the sooner I start working, the sooner I'll start earning more," I said, not very sure of myself. But, like my parents said, there was no guarantee I'd find a job. During that time, I had a friend named Jessica, who had moved here from another country when we started middle school. Her family wasn't rich either, which might be why we got along so well and always hung out together. Jessica could speak some English, so we managed to communicate. Without realizing it, I started learning Spanish just by talking with her. By the time I was in 9th grade, I could speak Spanish pretty well. Maybe it was my Spanish skills that helped because, surprisingly, a travel agency decided to hire me. They saw value in my ability to speak Spanish. Jessica and I, having both left school after middle school, started working and gradually lost touch. I focused on my job, determined to earn money. Time passed quickly, and soon I was 26 years old. I often used a hotel lounge for work. It was a fancy but cozy place, and the snacks and coffee were reasonably priced. We held our meetings there with the staff. The waiter working there at the time was Max. The hotel hosted many foreigners, so he spoke Spanish too. Sometimes, I would be there with foreign guests. Maybe because we both spoke Spanish, we connected right away. Max started a conversation, and before I knew it, we were in a whirlwind romance that led to marriage. For a girl from a poor family, getting married was a big deal. I expected to start an exciting new life, however, reality was quite different. When we were getting married, Max had a request. If it's okay with you, Jennifer, I'd like us to live at my family home. His father had passed away a few years ago, and he was worried about his mother living alone. Her energy levels were dropping, and having someone around to help her seemed like a good idea. Since I worked remotely, Max thought it would be convenient for me to stay home, look after his mother, and handle the household chores. On the flip side, Max often worked long hours and wasn't home much. With his rare days off, having me, a home-based worker, around must have seemed like a good arrangement to him. But I couldn't agree to it right away. When I first visited Max's family home to introduce myself before our marriage, his mother reacted strangely after asking about my education. "Jennifer, which university did you graduate from?" she asked. When I honestly replied, "Well, I didn't go to college. I only finished middle school," my mother-in-law went silent and just looked at me. Her expression showed she looked down on me. "Oh, middle school. Well, she said, eyeing me with disdain. Because of this, I thought living with her might not be easy, so I mentioned my concerns to Max casually. "Max, do you think your mom has some doubts about me?" I asked him. He chuckled a bit and replied, "Nah, that's not true. Mom trusts me, and I'm sure she doesn't have any bad feelings toward my wife either." His words made me think maybe I was worrying too much. Max also promised that if any issues arose, he would talk to his mother for me. With that reassurance, I agreed to move in with his family. But once I started living there, things weren't as smooth as I'd hoped. It was a harsh reality check. Whenever Max and I visited his family's house, his mother would speak to him with such warmth. "Max, thank you. I'm so grateful you're living with me," she would say, and Max would respond, "Of course, I knew it would help you out." They seemed like such a close mother and son. But towards me, my mother-in-law's attitude was completely different, cold, even. "Well, Jennifer, just make sure you don't hold Max back," she'd say emotionlessly, as if she were giving orders to a servant. It was clear she still looked down on me. But at that moment, Max stood up for me. "Don't worry, Jennifer is doing a great job working too," he said. However, when I mentioned this, my mother-in-law briefly looked stern, a detail I didn't miss. I figured I should talk to Max if things ever got troublesome and decided to handle it my way. We were family, after all, and I didn't want any tension between us. That's how we started living together, but reality didn't bend in a favorable direction. One day, as I was working on my computer as usual, my mother-in-law burst into my room and said angrily, "Hey, Jennifer, when are you going to clean my room? It needs to be done by 10 a.m. every day." I was surprised because I had never heard of such a rule before. Sure, I agreed to do household chores, but we never discussed to what extent. If she had just told me kindly from the beginning, that would have been fine. After all, I have my own job and can't be available all the time. However, arguing wouldn't be mature, so I quickly finished my work, apologized, and started cleaning her room. Meanwhile, my mother-in-law was just relaxing in the living room, watching TV and eating snacks. Max had mentioned concerns about his mother's health, but she seemed well enough to clean her own room. I had imagined she might have difficulty walking, but she was more lively than I thought. Once the cleaning was done, she immediately ordered, "Now, start making dinner, and I like it plain. I won't tolerate anything too strong." She even told me to go shopping for ingredients right away. I thought it was too early to start cooking, but I decided to get it done and return to my work. When I got back from shopping, my mother-in-law was still relaxing. It was hard not to feel annoyed, but I chose to hold back and just finish what needed to be done. I thought maybe she was testing me, hoping she'd understand in time. But that hope lingered for months. There were days when she complained about me being just 5 minutes late with the laundry or that the bathtub wasn't cleaned perfectly, nitpicking to an almost obsessive degree. Before I knew it, I ended up doing all the chores around the house while my mother-in-law just lounged around. Honestly, if she had the energy to nitpick, she could very well do some chores herself. I started to worry that if this continued, it would start affecting my job too. That was the last thing I needed. So, I decided to wait until the evening to talk to Max about it. Once my mother-in-law had gone to bed, I told him everything. "Hey, I think your mom just doesn't like me. I'm getting so tired of being constantly criticized," I said. But Max just chuckled and said, "Come on, that can't be true. Mom's a kind person. There won't be any issues as long as Jennifer doesn't do anything strange. Please try to get along with her." He didn't believe me. Maybe it's because she's always doting on him and never complains to him. In fact, when Max is around, my mother-in-law says, "Jennifer, why don't we take a break and have some tea?" But even knowing that, there's a limit to my patience with this kind of life. I spend all day doing household chores and end up having to work on my job at night. To be honest, my trust in Max is starting to fade. If nothing changes, I might just collapse from all the stress. Then, in the midst of all this, my mother-in-law dropped a bombshell. "Jennifer, I'll be away for about a week, about 3 months from now, so make sure you keep the house in order, okay?" She sprang this on me out of nowhere. When I asked what was going on, she said, "Max suggested we go on an overseas vacation." That's my boy, always knowing. I was thrilled at the thought of traveling abroad. I couldn't wait. But when my mother-in-law dropped the bomb about the vacation, I was shocked. Max hadn't mentioned a word of it to me, and it seemed like I was being left out, expected to stay behind and manage the house. I needed to talk to Max about this right away, so I brought it up that night. His response was surprising. "Oh, Mom already told you. But you're coming too, right?" It turned out we had misunderstood each other. It seems my mother-in-law had lied to me. Even if Max wanted me to go, I couldn't possibly enjoy a trip with her. In frustration, I told him, "I don't want to go. I can't possibly have a good time with your mother." Then Max completely lost it and lashed out. "Jennifer, what the heck are you saying? How long are you going to keep up this childish nonsense? I won't allow you to speak ill of Mom like that. You better reflect on this. It's a vacation abroad, for crying out loud, and I want to enjoy it too," he retorted. I was completely shocked. I couldn't believe Max wouldn't trust me this much. Staying in that house had become nothing but agony for me. To prove to Max that I was telling the truth, I decided to take action. The next day, since Max was off work, the 3 of us had breakfast together. That's when I confronted my mother-in-law. "You're trying to leave me out of the trip abroad, aren't you?" I asked. My mother-in-law replied defiantly, "Oh, did I say that, Jennifer? If you want to come, just come along, right?" But Max interrupted, "Hey, Jennifer, don't you understand yet? Apologize to Mom. Why are you being so defiant? You're not a child anymore." Despite my desire to clear things up and make Max understand, my mother-in-law insulted me in the worst way. "Well, maybe Jennifer should just stay home, right? It's too early for someone like you to travel abroad. You won't appreciate the experience with your lack of education. Besides, lazing around at home every day without working, do you even deserve to go abroad? You know it, don't you?" she sneered. I was shocked that she still believed I was unemployed. I've explained my job to her multiple times. Even during our greetings, I've told her what I do, haven't I? I confronted her, but she just looked down on me. "What job?" "Remote work. Don't joke with me. You're just playing on the computer at home. It's been getting on my nerves every day. There's no way you're making money with that. You're just stealing Max's earnings," she blurted out. That really made me angry, but before I could respond, she went even further. "I have Max, and that's enough for me. Max can speak Spanish and works at a renowned hotel. There's no need to waste his earnings on a woman like you, uneducated and unemployed. A bottom feeder like you should just leave as soon as possible." She continued, just kept going. After all her harsh words, I looked at Max, hoping he would understand. But his response was unexpected. "Well, I can understand how Mom feels. Maybe Jennifer needs to cool off a bit," he said nonchalantly, as if he were fed up with me. At that moment, I made a decision. I couldn't endure being treated like this by both the mother and son any longer. Even though my mother-in-law told me to leave, I still wanted to confirm. "Am I really supposed to leave?" I asked, laughing. She replied, "Of course. Leave as soon as you can. We don't need bottom feeders like you around." I said, "Understood," and began preparing to move out. I simply nodded to the two of them and left the house. As I was leaving, my mother-in-law called after me with a sneer. "Enjoy your poor life as it suits a bottom feeder like you," she mocked. But they didn't realize that consequences would follow their actions. About 3 months after I left the house, around the time they were scheduled to go on their trip abroad, my mother-in-law called me. "Jennifer, I finally reached you." "What's going on?" She sounded quite frantic. "First," I replied, "I'm surprised you managed to call this number." She said, "Of course, I tried several times and couldn't get through. I even called your parents' house to get your new number." I had informed my parents that if either Max or my mother-in-law called, they should call back at this number. "What's wrong?" I asked, with a tone of concern. She replied, panicked, "What's wrong? We're getting all sorts of collection letters. Help me out, I didn't know about any of this." "Well, that's expected. You haven't been paying the utilities, have you?" I simply answered. My mother-in-law seemed lost in her thoughts. "I absolutely thought Max was covering our living expenses. To find out you were paying for everything, why didn't you tell me? I had no idea you were making that much money." "It's a bit late to bring this up now," I said, though perhaps Max had finally told her the truth. That's right, I had already started my own business using expertise I gained from the travel agency where I used to work. My business had grown to the point of earning $20 million, being widely accepted around the world. What probably shocked my mother-in-law even more was Max's income. Just because he worked in a lounge at a well-known hotel didn't mean he was making a lot of money. If anything, Max was just an average worker on the lower end of the pay scale, and speaking Spanish at that hotel was nothing special. There were many Spanish speakers there. Even if he could speak it, it wasn't anything remarkable. There was no way his income could cover the living expenses for 3 people. In reality, just making ends meet for himself was all he could manage. It's ridiculous that she hadn't realized until a collection notice came that I was the one paying all the living expenses for my husband's family. But the more I listened to my mother-in-law, the more shocking facts came to light. The reason why she insisted on me living with them wasn't to keep an eye on her, it was because she had been living off my father-in-law's wealth. Blinded by a temporary influx of cash, she had spent lavishly until there was nothing left. That's when she turned to Max, presuming he was earning well. But Max knew his income was low, and he was somewhat aware of my earnings, which is why he turned to me for help. Hearing this only confirmed how irresponsible they were, but their irresponsibility didn't stop there. "By the way, are you managing to make the car payments?" my mother-in-law exclaimed, raising her voice. "Exactly. Both Max and I have bills piling up since you moved out. I've been receiving more and more credit card statements addressed to both of us. The amounts due each month kept increasing, and before I knew it, they amounted to quite a sum. Their level of luxury spending was beyond me. I have no idea how they were spending without paying the living expenses," she added, sounding exasperated. Max's bills had surpassed his salary, and my mother-in-law hadn't stopped her old habits of lavish spending. It seemed they had both gotten themselves into debt, now totaling over $440,000. What's even more shocking is they thought Max would somehow manage it, if it was just a bit of debt, as my mother-in-law put it. And Max thought I would take care of it if things got tough. The level of dependence in grown adults was appalling. Beyond exasperation, I was starting to feel the danger. So when my mother-in-law brazenly said, "So, Jennifer, you can sort this out for us, right?" I was astonished by her audacity. I made it clear to her. "After everything that's happened, you're asking for help now. There's no way I'm helping." That's when Max suddenly took the phone. "Hey, Jennifer, you're my wife. You have a duty to help us out. Do something. We can't pay this off," he demanded. I couldn't believe their nerve, but I did offer him a glimmer of mercy. "So, you want to come over?" "I might consider it if you do," I replied. He was immediately enthusiastic. "Oh yeah. You'll let us stay, and you'll sort out the money. Then let's do that. Where's your place?" "I'll head there right now," he said eagerly. I had to be honest. "Well, if you can make it, I'm in Hawaii right now. I have a vacation home here." Both Max and my mother-in-law couldn't hide their shock. "What? You mean Hawaii?" "We can't afford to go there right now," Max panicked. I calmly replied, "Weren't you planning to travel abroad? Just swing by Hawaii, your mother would love it. And you did ask my family for my phone number, right? Didn't you realize it was an international number? Oh, and don't forget the cost of this call. It adds up if you're on for a long time," I added, making my point clear. I said, "If we get divorced, I might think about helping with the money too." Max quickly replied, "All right. I got it. Let's just get divorced first, then." It seemed like Max realized his debts were something he couldn't trade for anything else. So, I told him I'd deliver the divorce papers once I got back to California and ended the call. About a week later, I returned to California, made sure to have the divorce papers properly written up, and the divorce went through without a hitch. Max looked quite worn out, so I guess he'd been living pretty lean these last few days. He mentioned something at that time. It turns out he had been counting on my money for the overseas trip as well. Hearing that didn't even surprise me anymore. They probably thought I would pay off their debts, but of course, I had no intention whatsoever of doing that. What I proposed was, first of all, for both of them to stop living so extravagantly, and then for Max and my mother-in-law to work hard. I told them that if they did, they could eventually pay off the debt and at least manage the basics. When Max heard this, he lashed out. Hey, that's not what you promised. You were supposed to think about the debt. But I replied, that's why I did you a favor by thinking of a way for you both to handle your debt repayment. So, good luck. Once you can afford to travel abroad again, I'll invite you to my Hawaii villa, I said with a touch of sarcasm and left their place. Afterward, they both seemed to be working themselves to the bone from dawn till dusk, barely scraping by. It was probably a good lesson for them since they'd had it easy until now. On a different note, I heard that Jessica also built a house in Hawaii. I had a reunion with her after so long. She took up a job that took her around the world after graduating from middle school and now seems to be a company president, just like me. She had her parents come over to the house she bought, and they've been living it up together. So, I called my parents over from California, and we started living here. Now, I sometimes visit Jessica's place. We both feel blessed to be able to give back to our parents and encourage each other as we work hard at our jobs.